Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Creation Myths. We're here. We're a little late tonight. That's okay. Sometimes life happens. Thank you all for being here. As always, chat, please let us know if there's any audio or video issues. We've got, as you can see, we've got a great panel with us tonight. So in a second, I'll have all of the guests introduce themselves and plug their stuff. And also, we'll be showing this segment from the 2025 Genesis Apologetics Conference, which I believe took place in February, if I recall, although I don't recall the exact date. But we'll be hearing from Dr. Dan Biddle on the top 10 evidences for biblical creation, or at the very least, that's the name of his talk. We'll see if we actually hear anything resembling that topic over the course of his talk. But before we do that, we have some wonderful friends joining me tonight. So we're just going to go top to bottom. Zach, tell us about you and your channel. And
I'm Zach Hancock. I'm an evolutionary biologist. I specialize in population genetics. I run a YouTube channel at Talk PopGen. There I do a little bit of evolution education, some pseudoscience debunking, and a bit of like history and philosophy of science.
And Jackson, who are you? Why are you here?
Hello. I don't know. I just stumbled in. I opened the wrong door, I think. I was looking for Dapper Show. No. Hello, my name is Jackson. I run a channel. I don't have a cool name like Creation Myths or Guts at Gibbon. I'm just Jackson Wheat. It's very easy to find me. I also do, as an animal enthusiast, I have been doing a series for just shy of eternity on the Ancestor's Tale, where we go through the history of all of life. And so if you like evolution and you like animals, check that out. And I also teach in the meat space.
Okay, that's me, right? I'm next.
You're up, Erica. Who are you and why are you here?
Well, hopefully you guys can hear me okay. I actually get summoned whenever Genesis Apologetics is doing anything dumb. By definition, especially if it's Dan Biddle. It's like the light in the sky. So I'm Erica, I'm Guts at Gibbon. I do a lot of like debunking creationism of all stripes here on YouTube under the moniker Guts at Gibbon. I'm a fourth-year PhD candidate, so I also do this quote-unquote science stuff officially, but I'm in the throes of like testing all my doing all my dissertation work and like running through all my analyses. And so I'm feeling less like a scientist every day, which I think is a sign that I'm becoming a better scientist because none of my stuff is working the way I want it to work, which is just great. But I'm here because I like to dunk on Genesis Apologetics in particular. I consider them to be sort of the lowest rung, one of the lower rungs of the young earth creationist organizations. Dan Biddle is here to play around with the big boys and cosplay like he is ICR, CMI, or AIG. And I'm here to make sure that he does that unsuccessfully, or at least that people recognize that he's unsuccessful at doing that. Oh, we study hominins, and not hominins, but hominoids, and then sort of parlaying into hominins.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you all for being here. I was really happy that people responded when I put out the call for this one, because unlike some of the other presentations in this conference, this one is not super heavy on the substance, folks. This is about 40 minutes long, and I will tell you, we're going to jump around because there is a lot that is just like scripture says it, therefore it's true. And we don't need to spend 10 minutes watching that. So before we get into
like real Sunday school, like a back in the pew kind of vibe, it's like, oh my God, I'm back in my Sunday church again.
Yeah. Now, before we get into any of that, just want to remind everybody here, everyone watching, either live or in the future, hello, future people, these three wonderful people are linked down below. And if you are watching this and you are not subscribed to these three people, you should make sure you click on those links and do that right away. Because if you are watching this and enjoy what I do, you will enjoy what they do. So please give them your eyeballs periodically and your algorithm supporting clicks. So this is the second talk at this conference. And I will say, before we go any further, I just want to say this tonight, right now, will be the third time I have watched this, because I watched the entire 4-hour conference. And then today I went through this talk specifically with a fine-tooth comb to take notes on the timestamps and everything. So this will be the third time I have to hear Dan Biddle talk about man's word versus God's word. So I'm going to
That's not
play.
even his thing. That's
I
not
know!
even his moniker. He can't even get his own stuff. Like these, and then
stole it.
AIG, and AIG stole it from Gish and then Whitcomb and Morris, and then George B. Creedy Price, and then it's like there has not been a new argument like since Cicero in the creationist community.
Yeah. So what I'm going to do is, because it takes like 16 minutes to get into any actual content here, so I'm going to play just a few little snippets of the first 15 minutes or so, just to give everybody a taste of what those 15 minutes are like, just so everyone sees it. And then at like the 1650 mark, he finally gets to what is the title of his talk. And he shows on a slide what his top 10 are. And that's where we'll actually have some stuff to say. And he'll talk about something related to that for a chunk at some point, sort of, kind of, maybe. But let me just show everyone some of what we're working with here at this. Again, this is a apologetics like science conference. The point of this is to do science communication, and you will see what we're working with here. So let me just jump right away to like the 1 minute mark. All right, and you'll see, like right away, you can see God said it, that settles it. Like, what are we doing?
Good. Well, this is a good book, and this amazing book is different than any other book that you can buy at Amazon or Barnes & Noble, because it's living and active, and it's sharper than any two-edged sword. And I'm going to demonstrate that today with just the very first verse of the Bible itself. The Lord wrote this and inspired people to write it exactly as they wrote it. So let's just think about this for a minute. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. There's no accident with any of these words, because let's go through it for a minute.
Okay, we don't need to go through it for a minute. You get the idea. So let me just jump to, we'll go to 641, where he talks about the importance of faith.
I was hoping you would get to this part, Dan, because there's a line in here where I was listening and I was like, oh, okay, so we're at least he's honest. We're going pretty mask off.
It's very mask off. You'll see.
Existence. But here's where it gets a little bit personal, because the Bible says without faith, it's impossible to please God. And so when God says, by faith we understand that the universe was created by the word of God. So we have to have faith to understand. In other words, the key secret of Scripture, what it's saying is that if you want to see, if you want to have understanding about creation, you have to have faith. And I can...
That was the line that jumped out to me. Erica, was that, do we cover the part that you wanted, or should I keep going?
For me, there's a line, I don't know if it's before this or after this, but there's a line that he has in there at one point where he talks about how in order to understand science, you have to first, and what the truth is of science, right? You have to first be bought into Genesis. And he doesn't use the word bought, like buy in, but he's like, you have to trust. That's the word he uses. You have to trust God, and you have to trust Genesis. And only then can you actually, sort of like the mind flower of the world will open up to you, show you the truth of creationism. But like, I kind of love this, because this is a great explanation for why, if creationism is so evidently true and young Earth creationism is so well supported, why don't people ever come to it first before doing the conversion? Like, why does the conversion always have to come before the being convinced of young Earth creationism? And Biddle is like, because God built it that way, dude. What are you, a moron? Like, I'm okay, sure.
And by understand science, he means understand young Earth creationism. Yeah. How science must lead to young Earth creationism, not like understand how the scientific method works.
Yes, you won't understand the correct reality unless you have faith first. And it's, as Erica said, it's a very mask off kind of framing for this whole thing, right? Because again, this is, in theory, right, a science conference where we're presenting evidence that is scientific, that's independent of any prerequisite belief system in order for that evidence to operate, right? But
this is a science conference? I thought this was like a church sermon. I thought we were
it is, but that's the point.
Is there a difference for them?
Right. I mean, it, like when they have their things, it's all preaching to, not like when, like we've all gone to, everyone in this room has gone to a real science conference where you stand up at the front of the room and you talk to other scientists and you're like, here's what I did, blah, blah, blah. And then they ask you questions and you're communicating science back and forth, right?
And then you end with a call for everyone to return to the church. And oh no, never mind. Sorry.
And in this one, it's a bunch of creation scientists presenting to a room full of non-scientists.
Okay, so the audience is like a congregation. They're not like other creationists. Okay.
Right. We're presenting science, right? It's a science conference, but it's not to other scientists with the objective of communicating science. It's to a lay audience in both senses of the word, right? Which, like, it's part of this whole like cosplay thing that young earth creationists do, whether it's AIG with Answers Research Journal, or they've got the creation there's a couple conferences every year. There's the Genesis Apologetics conference. There's the what's the one that we've been going through where they published all the papers? The was that the Creation Research CRC Creation Research Conference was another one.
They have the ICC, the International Conference
that was
of Creation, which
that was
to
it,
me that's creme de la creme. That's the numero uno. That's the gold standard of creationist science as far as I'm concerned, because it's the most honest, right? Like it's sort of multi-organization, people contribute from AIG and ICR, and Todd Wood and New Creation do their thing there. And so they sort of have this free reign to like talk about controversial topics. Whereas the ARJ is like, if you don't believe the type of creationism we believe, we're not publishing it here. And then ICR is like, no natural selection,
right.
So like, which if you were to rank all of them, to me, and I don't know how you guys stand on this, but to me, the Genesis Apologetics Scientific Conference is like ranked right below like my local middle school science fair.
We're just look at this. This is 10 minutes in now. 9 minutes if you take away the guy introducing Biddle, right? And we're still doing the like Genesis waters nourishes the tree and secularism kills the tree thing. Like we're doing that. We're almost 10 minutes into this talk, right? So
I love why is Charles Darwin his own?
Because of those dirty compromisers,
Yeah, because Charles Darwin, Satan incarnate. He's the deceiver.
Yeah.
He's the prophet.
What is it from the Simpsons skit? It's like Charles Darwin was a cowardly drunk, and then he's like making out with like the devil himself on the stage.
All right, so I just want to go to because a lot of this is just about how like literal interpretation of scripture. Yeah, they use the word kinds, they use the word days, and it's like night and day and light and dark. It's literal day. But I want to just show this bit because again, this is straight out of like
Biddle, if you will.
I'm going to kick you out of the room. I'm going to kick you out. That's, how like there's like an F-bomb quotient in these, or like there's an F-bomb quota and you can't like exceed the F-bomb quota. There's also a bad pun quota. And like we're already that would
I'm in like the negatives out the gate.
It's bad. All right. So I just want to show this little bit because for anyone watching this familiar with creation science, you will recognize this stuff immediately. It's at this point probably, Erica, you know better than me, it's probably 70 or 80 years old at this point. But you all are going to recognize this one.
Which basis is this, the behemoth?
No, we'll get to that later. Don't worry.
Okay.
Start today with an open mind. It all comes down to this: who is your authority? Man's word is going to change all the time. If you go back and pick any topic about biology or abiogenesis or the age of the earth or anything, do you know that about every 50 years science changes its mind? It used to be that Lucy was the leading, ape to human proof. Now Lucy's out. Now there's a new one in. And before it was out, it was Neanderthal. Now that one's out. Now a new one's in. Every generation it changes, but the word of God gets it right the first time and never changes.
Stupid scientists learning new things.
There's so much to unpack in just that series of sentences, right? There's like not understanding what science is and what its purpose is, right? Science is not a worldview in the sense that it's like we're comforting ourselves with these nice ideas. It's a search for a better understanding of the world around us. It's a way of knowing and a way of investigating. By its very nature, the fact that it's provisional is built in. That's why it works so well, which is the negative to them. I'm pretty plugged into biological anthropology, right? Like I go to conferences every year. I work with these guys all the time. I see them every day when the semesters are on, like practicing biological anthropologists. It is completely news to me that Lucy or Australopithecus afarensis is out as a leading proof of human evolution, quote unquote. I mean, Lucy was a bombshell because that skeleton, that specimen, was so well filled out postcranially, which was not very. It's not very common for hominin fossils and for fossils in general to be so complete. When you are like reflecting laterally, Lucy's completion is approximately 80%. I mean, she's very, very complete, and most of what isn't is cranially. And since Lucy, gosh, the number of partial skeletons, and even we have a couple of like almost complete skeletons. And my favorite is STW 573, which is a 95+% Australopithecus africanus or Australopithecus prometheus, if you believe in that kind of thing. And these guys skip all of that. They don't talk about Sediba. They don't talk about any of the better preserved South African Australopiths, including like Australopithecus africanus. They don't talk about Homo naledi and how that throws a monkey wrench into everything. They lump Homo floresiensis in with the rest of late genus Homo and call it pathologic. They're dealing with the science of these sort of middle ground hominins that bridge the gap between these early hominins and then early members of genus Homo. And they just say, that stopped in like 1982 or something like that. And they don't go past that because it's too uncomfortable, because there's so many hominids that are so complete that, not so coincidentally, all corroborate the previous interpretations of Lucy when she was initially dug up, and the big arguments were being had about how bipedal was she. Not was she bipedal, but how bipedal was she. I mean, I could go on and on and on, but like, Dan Biddle, he is like, Genesis Apologetics has like the worst possible Lucy takes. Like he like plucked them from all of the Whitcomb and Morse and Dwayne Gish stuff from like the 1960s onward, and has not evolved since then.
The Michael Curtis just said that drum set is sitting there like Chekhov's gun. Killed me. Swayed me. Yeah. I've just been waiting for somebody to just like at some point, please. Also, can we not let him off the hook on this God's word doesn't change thing? Like God's word was not something that just one came together, right? It was like knitted together by a bunch of different people. Things were thrown out. Things have been changed. Read the Catholic Bible versus the Protestant Bible versus the Mormon Bible. I don't know. It seems to change a lot. And like even like down to like certain chapters have been removed from certain books. So it's like, what are you talking about? It hasn't changed. Like, not only that, like you're still trusting man because man is who wrote it and said that they were inspired by God, right? It's not like God told you that he's the one that wrote this, right? Like I don't know. I don't think we should let him off the hook on that.
There's a really good bit. I think one of my favorite bits from Eric Klein's book, 1177 BC, their civilization collapsed. So is when he talks about. A good book. I've got after 1177 on my shelf. I haven't read it yet, but one of my favorite parts is he discusses the biblical treatment of the Hittites. So the Hittites were one of the kingdoms that went out during the Bronze Age collapse, and the Bible was used by some like early archaeologists trying to figure out where the Hittite Empire was before we figured out that it was in Turkey. And based on the biblical description, they looked in the wrong place, and because the biblical authors, or at least the people who handed down the stories to the biblical authors, thought that the people they were interacting with were the Hittites, but they weren't. They were later people who had appropriated some of the cultures of the Hittites. And so we didn't figure that out till later because the Bible authors got it wrong. And so the archaeologists who were using the Bible as the referent got it wrong. And so that took time. So I don't know about gets it right every time, but
I think what he means by this is like his childhood Bible and his Sunday school interpretation has remained consistent over the 50 odd years that he's been alive. Sure.
He strikes me as someone that was really hurt when Pluto was demoted from being a planet. That just like, all right, I can never trust science again.
He's like, that shit is so woke. The fact that they demoted Pluto, that's the beginning of the end.
Astronomy. Yeah. So it's really funny that he says this, because just having gone through this earlier today, I'm realizing that actually later on in this, he contradicts himself here when he talks about how, because he catches himself one time later towards the very end, and he says something like, created within the last 6,000 years, or 7 to 8, 10,000. They're different chronology, and he kind of spends a couple minutes talking about the different chronologies and how they wouldn't ever use this word, but what he's describing is a good inclusive way to describe it, is to say created within the last 10,000 years, because that catches everybody.
DEI chronology.
Whereas if you say 6,000 or 6,500 years, you actually leave out certain texts. But if you say within 10,000, then it catches all the chronologies. So he was an advocate for inclusive language later on in his talk.
It's worth noting, just before we go on, right? The entire point of this section is just to inoculate people against trusting anything that goes against what is being taught at their local church, right? Like that's the whole point of this. It's don't question, don't look into any of this. Science, big S science, because it changes means none of it can be trusted. Throw it all out. Don't worry about it. We'll give you the proper, good, unchanging science. Despite the fact that Chris Roop gives a presentation at this conference that is completely different from any other creationist interpretation of hominins. So it's like, I guess their version is changing as well. But I guess, then they wouldn't consider that.
Following him on stage is Randy Galuza, is the next section, doing his continuous environmental tracking thing, which most young Earth creationists reject, because they accept, how dare they accept the basics of like variation and natural selection.
I mean, it's
so
really
I'm going to play
just.
Go ahead.
Please go.
No, go. You go, and then I'm going to play a teeny little bit.
I will ramble on this topic forever, so you should cut me off. But I will take this opportunity.
I'm going to play. If you want to.
Please, after you.
All right. I'm gonna play.
Actually, I was thinking about
it. I'm gonna mute all of you. All right. This is calling me back to when we recorded that Dismantled series a few years ago, and you all should have seen how long it took to record each of those episodes. All right, I'm just gonna play a few seconds here because there's just a funny thing he says, and then we're gonna jump ahead to where he gets to the 10 reasons and then talks about not those for the rest of the talk. So here we go, just for a little bit, and then we'll jump.
So students want to know today, how many more pages do I have to turn before I run into truth? Well, I would argue you got to stop right at the first page and you run into truth. Genesis is important because think about this. Look at this graph. We have here the first chapters of Genesis, the first 11 chapters highlighted, and every one of those connecting lines is where the book of Genesis, those first 11 chapters, is referenced by all the other books in the Bible. All 65 other books of the Bible are consistently overwoven with Genesis 1 to 11. And did you know that Jesus...
We don't need to know.
Did you guys know?
We'll do this. We're going to do this line. Hang on, Jackson. We're going to do this line, and then we'll see what we know.
Scripture, the Old Testament, over 40 times, and every single time he did, he regarded it as a literal historical reference every single time.
Okay, that's the key there, because it's very AIG. If you don't believe Genesis, then you got to toss all the rest out. Jackson, go ahead.
Wasn't it? Oh my gosh, I'm drawing a blank now. This made me think of the in Game of Thrones, they have the textbook that's like referential to the events that are in like House of the Dragon. It's like,
the book.
This must be true because it's referenced. We got it. That makes it true. The events later in Harry Potter reference the earlier events in Harry Potter. That means it's true. That's how you know.
Like the scholarship on whether or not later people thought of Genesis as a historical account, as he just said, the scholarship is pretty clear that most people didn't, right? I mean, they did in the sense that they believed that God created, but they didn't really have a perspective at all on like the age of the earth or like whether those 6 days were literal 6 days. I mean, one of the first church fathers, right, like Augustine, he writes the literal meaning of Genesis, a text that is called that, and he's like, yeah, it's not literal in the sense that why would God create things in 4 days? It's clear he did that shit like instantaneously, right? And people have been arguing about this since the dawn of the church. Since people were putting it down, putting opinions down to paper, they've been disagreeing on what virtually every verse and every book in the entire Bible means. That's just the nature of people. And when you're trying to interpret a book that's supposed to be divine, and you can use that for, odds and ends, you're going to, feel motivated to interpret it in specific ways or not interpret it in specific ways as well.
Yeah.
So
Origin,
yeah.
St. Gregory of Nyssa, St. Maximus the Confessor. Yeah.
Yeah.
All
Thomas
non-literal.
Aquinas later on.
This is fantastic. Yeah. It's not literally literal. It's figuratively literal, which is both funny because of the recent redefinition of the word literal, but also is an excellent description of how it operates as a text, right? It is describing things that actually happened in a non-literal way, right? It's a literal description, but the description is not a cookbook. It's not a step-by-step guide of what happened. And I am as far as you can get from like a scholar in Bible history and Bible interpretation, but I listen to people who are, and I read things from experts in that field. And my impression is that there are some people in the field who will say this was written as a literal historical account. That is a minority position in the field, and a much more robust position in the field of people who are actually studying that type of thing professionally is that it is a poetic narrative account of whatever events. And all the young earth people from Genesis, Apologetics, AIG, CMI, ICR, all of them will say, you look at the text, it's a literal account. They'll talk about the translation of different words, and there was light and there was dark, and that means a literal 24-hour day-night cycle and all this stuff. But then you read like actual scholars in this kind of thing and like linguistics and stuff from antiquity, and their interpretation is, generally speaking, not that.
And I think the entire point, at least the point that I always try to point out, because I'm not a biblical scholar either, but like when I talk to people about this, it's like the fact that there's disagreement on it, though, completely undermines the idea that this is like settled, it should be interpreted literally, and that it's a recent woke thing to sort of spin it and give it a different interpretation. Like that's just revisionist history on their part. But before we go on, I want to say one more thing. I think that it is just wonderful, that banner right behind Dan Biddle. This is not ashamed. Genesis 1:1, which I think that's a great sign for our side for our side of things, that it's like they're having to reassure each other that it's like, no, it's not, you shouldn't be embarrassed. It's not cringe to be a young earth creationist. Yes, it is cringe. And that's why you have the sign up there.
It's extremely cringe. Yeah, there's a part that I cut out here where he's basically pleading to the audience of like, look, start from square one today. All you need is an open mind. But just come to this with an open mind. I promise. It's all you need. It's all you need. Yeah, this is a far cry too.
It's like a far cry from where we were, though, even in 2005, even in the 1990s, even when like in the 1960s, like all through that time, it's been less and less normalized to be a young earth creationist and not get dunked on by everybody in your life. So it's like, I don't know. I like to see it's a positive change in a sea of negative things right now.
Totally. All right. We're going to jump ahead to where they actually maybe start to talk about relevant things. We'll see. All right, here we go.
Reason of why Christ had to die. So these are some of the top 10 evidences that I personally think are important when it comes to exploring Scripture. We're going to get through some of these today. I might cover.
I just want to appreciate the fact that he's now wasted. How far are we into this? We're 17 minutes in, so he's wasted 16 of his minutes talking about not the topic of his talk. And then he gets to the slide that is, here's the topic of my talk. We're going to get to, I don't know, we'll see. The craft is not quite honed.
His list of 10 things sounds like what I see on my Instagram feed when like someone talks to a little kid at the playground and they're like, what are the top 10 coolest things? And they're like, little creatures and big creatures and flying creatures and the big flood and the human lifespans. And you're
trying to figure out what these things, I'm trying to figure out where he's going to go with these things. Like
for some of these, yeah, it's like, I
let's
can see what he's saying. But
right,
what does
so-
little creatures even mean?
Jackson.
So
I'll give
a
you-
perfectly tuned universe. We all know what that one's going to be, right? Chat, tell us, what is that one going to be?
Principle,
Like,
yeah.
if we were playing, I should have made bingo cards for this because you all would have bingo by the end of this. Perfectly tuned universe is all the fine tuning, Goldilocks zone, physical constants, all that fun stuff, right? Beginning of life. Okay, right. I think this might have been the one. There was one of these in here. It might have been this one, or it might have been David Reeves later on, where, like Goo to You by Way of the Zoo and Fish to Fisherman, somebody had a new one that I had never heard before. And there's like 20 of them, and there was a new one, and I couldn't believe it. And that might be in here.
I don't think it is, Dan. I don't think it is because I heard him say "Goo to You" by Way of the Zoo, and I was it was disconcerting, and I was like, I thought to myself, surely by now there would be a new one, and
there's a new
one.
Not. Somebody later on does have a new one. I forget what it was. It was like Space to Spaceman or something like that. It was big creatures flying. Some of these aren't even in here though. He doesn't even get to like flying creatures.
Insta-humans.
Dude, he doesn't even have the good ones. Like, he doesn't even have like soft tissue and dinosaur fossils, or like the misdated, carbon 14 diamonds or whatever. Like, he doesn't have the greatest. He's so low on the totem pole that he's like doing baby's first apologetics for creation.
That's such a good description of what this talk is, because it so heavily relies on, you have to start with scripture and then you can interpret the science in the context of, it really is baby's first apologetics. It's exactly what this is.
I think that could be the title of the video is baby's first apologetics, or like on your thumbnail or something,
Dan Biddle, baby's first. Okay. All right. Let's see where this goes, because you will be shocked where this goes immediately following the list.
Some later. These last three we're going to cover by way of a movie and a talk I'll give on the flood later today. But let's look at scripture again. So Isaiah 45:18.
Right back to scripture. We couldn't even focus. Dan.
He's too scared to talk about the science. He's like, every time he gets a little close, he's like, oh, no, gotta pull back, gotta go back to scripture. The first S is scripture, second S is science.
He does not know what he's talking about with regard to science. That's so accurate, Jackson. Like, you're gonna hear him fumble his way like a guy in the pitch black dark, feeling his way along the cave walls through some of these topics. And I swear to God, some of them are just isn't it cool that this critter has this cool adaptation? And then
that's literally coming up.
He can't conceive of how something like that could evolve. And so he's like, you expect me to believe that shit could evolve? And homie couldn't even name the 4 mechanisms of evolution.
What's insta-humans? I have again, this is my 3rd time through this talk. I don't know the answer to this question. I don't know.
Is that like when you put a little bag in the microwave and it's like insta-humans?
I don't know. So we'll watch I'm going to let this play for a minute or 2. We'll see if I get bored with it, because it's fine tuning stuff. You'll all recognize this. So let's let this go for a minute or 2, and then we can then we get to DNA stuff.
Sun and the moon, the gravity, the forces, the orbiting, the speed. Any closer to the moon or the sun, we would either freeze or fry based upon being too close or too far away.
All right, Jackson, hit us. Go for it.
That's not true for thousands of miles in either direction. I hate that they'll say that stupid line if we were a couple feet one way or the other, the earth would freeze. No, that's literally not true. That's not true for even our normal trip around the sun. That's just not true.
It's an elliptical orbit. It varies in its distance from the sun by more than they say it can vary.
Yeah, that's just so stupid. It
just seems like that's why there's life here and not on Jupiter. There's other planet, there's other hard substances in the solar system where things could be living on. It turns out they're not there because they're not in the right spot, right? To me, this is such a silly argument.
Yeah, there's 4 inner planets. There's a handful of dwarf planets in the asteroid belt, and then you've got moons of Jupiter and Saturn that are all massive enough and have atmospheres that could potentially, if they had the right composition in the right place, could support life. It's it's Zach, the way you just described that, it's almost like how natural selection works with variation, and then you pick the variant that works just due to the conditions that exist, right? I don't know. It's almost like God was just like trying out different things. Hi, I wonder which of these distances from the sun will support life. Let's find out.
I'm here for the azotosomes on like Enceladus or something. That's what we need.
All right, let's keep
Jackson,
going.
I don't know what that is. Like,
Azotosomes?
You know so much about the tiny little dudes that I like. If I can't see it with the naked eye and it's not like
It's
really
live chat.
honestly coordinate, I do not know that.
There you go. It's so when I did my lecture with my students on, I'm so sorry. I know this is like tangent. When I did my lecture with my students on like organic chem, I was killing vitalism during that lecture, because like I felt like that was an important topic in biology. And so then I was going through like, okay, well, here's how we know that there are these organic molecules all throughout the universe are on Ryugu. We know that they're on Enceladus and all the other, like various other moons of like Jupiter and Saturn. And azotosomes are these little like hypothetical nitrogenous organisms that are on, I don't actually, now I think about it, I don't think it was Enceladus, but they're on one of the really cold moons. And the idea is like they have a nitrogen base like cell membrane instead of the kind that we have. And it's like it's extremely unlikely to exist, but there were some fun little papers that came out about it. But sorry, anyway, side tangent.
That's awesome. Thank you. I always learn so much from Jackson. I love it. All right,
too.
let's continue on this fine-tuning tangent for this little bit, and then we'll get into, I promise we'll do some biology soon.
We have a perfectly tuned universe. Now that's a theological string that you can keep pulling on, and you're going to run into things like this. You have to consider the physical constants. What we have is called the Goldilocks zone, where Earth is a perfect distance from the sun to allow for liquid water. Too close, water would evaporate. Too far, it would freeze. When you think about that just itself, and you stop there and you think, my gosh, if you look at water and all the different forms that it can take on Earth and how close we are to the sun and our proximity to the moon, it allows water to take multiple different forms. It can get pulled up in icebergs, it can go in glaciers, it can turn into steam, it can be in liquid form. Anything change in our environment like that, or our proximity in the universe, that whole phenomenon would go out the door. But over and over again, Earth's magnetic field, we have a special atmosphere with the exact percentage of oxygen and carbon dioxide.
I just want to say, so we can I'll jump ahead to the next part. Now we get the idea, fine-tuning all these different parameters. Earth's atmospheric oxygen has fluctuated wildly. It doesn't have to be 21% or whatever it is in order to work. It has been very different from that historically. Come on, guys. Like, just...
Oh, yeah, you're right. Because well, again, I'm sure he knows nothing about like the evolutionary history of life on Earth, but like there was like negligible amounts of oxygen, in the early Earth atmosphere, and then the composition did a complete switch between 2.4 and 2.1 billion years ago with the great oxygen catastrophe or oxygenation, whatever you want to call it.
I like the term I learned from my colleague, oxygen apocalypse, which I really like that because for 99% of things on Earth, that's what it was.
Right, yeah, because you like before that you find like uraninite and pyrite and non-oxidized iron and all these other things that like we know there were no appreciable amounts of oxygen in the atmosphere, and then suddenly all these things, and then we find like oxidized manganese all of a sudden, or magnesium. We find oxidized magnesium all of a sudden, and it's like that's really interesting because we know that's playing a role in photosynthesis in our aerobic photosynthesizers. That's really interesting. And so like these oxidized, actually, hold on. Is it oxidized manganese or is it manganese? Was I right the first time?
I don't know which it is. I just know the banded iron formations that we can use to document the onset of ocean oxygenation. But the point is, I think that era in Earth's history where we have clear geological evidence where there was not atmospheric oxygen.
It was manganese.
Those layers exist, And creationists would have to compress them into their 6,000 or 8,000 or 10,000 year timeline, right? The young earthers have to include those things in their timeline. So you can't just say Earth was created 6,500 years ago with the current level of oxygen in the atmosphere. You have to account for all of this stuff that's indicative of low atmospheric oxygen.
Well, so that's a really interesting one, and one that I find it's in such flux, much like the flood boundary, right? Like which rocks are created rocks and which rocks are not. Yeah. It's completely up in the air because what I always pose is that it's like, okay, well, death is bad. That's one thing that all young Earth creationists share is that death is bad. So you cannot have dead microfossils all like strewn throughout your rock layers. So if there's microfossils in it, it has to be from the flood. It has to be. It cannot be created rock unless God is using death, and that has theological implications I don't think that they can handle, which means there's a shit ton of rock that they have to account for that is not even, we're not even talking about stuff that's like sedimentary in nature that could even be associated with any type of like fluvial deposit, let alone all of the other issues with the flood that we could get into. But it's the little things that build up over time, much like a sedimentary deposit.
Much like, right. It's a sedimentation of flood debunking evidence, right? Just stacking on top of itself, layer by layer.
Get someone on those drums immediately.
Yeah.
That's what the drum kit's for.
That's what the drum kit's for.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay. So I am going to let this play for about a minute and a half. We're going to go from 1921 to about not quite 21 minutes. Everyone's going to have a lot of thoughts on this. Hold them, and then we can unload after this whole segment, just talking about like DNA stuff. And oh boy, I forget what Biddle's, anyone know off the top of your head what Biddle's degree is in? Because it sure as hell isn't like genetics or molecular biology based on this stuff.
Industrial psychology, which I had to Google, and that's the psychology of like employees in a workplace.
Cool.
He's the last person I would want to go to if I had a workplace problem.
That would be some weird. Okay, so that is going to explain a lot of what's going on in the next 90 seconds, folks. You've been warned.
So that he can put us there. Well, let's consider about humans for a minute. We have 37 trillion cells. Each cell, if we were to unroll it, has 6 feet of DNA when uncoiled. God even has a special way of folding up our DNA so it can fit into DNA molecules. And if you were to tie all that DNA together in just one human body, it would stretch 67 billion miles, going back and forth to the moon 150,000 times. Each one of those parts of our DNA speak for protein expressions to build exactly the person of you and no other. That had to be done instantly. It didn't happen over time, over evolution. When we look at something like DNA replication, it even becomes more profound because inside of our bodies right now, there are these little DNA replication machines that are working to replicate our DNA because DNA degrades over time. You don't want to get all these mutations. So you have this little copying machine, billions of them in your body that are stripping apart your DNA and manufacturing and copying it and making new copies. But that is a machine that could only be seen at a microscopic level. And things like this have to be engineered. That didn't come about by chance. It didn't crawl out of the mud. It didn't evolve over millions of years. That's a molecular machine that God himself designed for us at a very, very small microscopic level.
All right, so I just want to, there are specific things that based on your faces you all reacted to there. So first thing I want to ask is Zach, I forget what he said. He went by like distance of DNA, but in each of your cells, do all, whatever distance it is, however many feet or meters or whatever he said, is that all for proteins?
So there's a few funny things he said there. One is that obviously a tiny portion of it is for proteins, probably less than 2%. And it's really even probably less than the cited number, as we discover that many more of the proteins that we thought were proteins are actually pseudogenes. So the number is like constantly going down the more and more we learn.
And it's like, and to be clear, right now it's like 1.5%.
Yeah, So, and it's probably a little less than that. But like the idea is that the vast majority doesn't. What did he say? Speak for proteins. Like the word, the verbiage was very funny.
Yeah, it was
the other
weird.
thing that trips me out here is that they really like to lean on this, like how much DNA we have in our cells. There's just so much DNA, and it just must be created. And I was like, man, like if you take like an amoeba, which has like 60 gigabases of DNA, man, you could go to Pluto and back a bunch of like they must be so much more complex, right? Like God must really, really like
really focused on amoeba,
you know, and so or onions or like lungfish and salamanders, like all of these other organisms that have so much more DNA than us. So that kind of argument to me just like immediately becomes ridiculous once you start taking into account the genome size variation.
Yeah, I think Ante Meridium here speaks for a bunch of us. So I'm a geneticist. That was painful. Yeah, that was really bad, just in terms of just descriptions of DNA and what it does, and the packaging of like God designed the way to package it. Well, you know, it's actually not hyper specific the way it's packaged. It's just a lot of opposite charges, and they wrap around each other. I don't know. It's just
biochemistry.
It's not that specific.
So with that GIF too of like the nano machines that walks its way down. They love it. You see it in everybody.
The kinesin.
Yeah, exactly.
And the Dynian motors. Yeah.
Very Discovery Institute with the molecular motors animation showing it. Even though that process, it is fast, it's also super sloppy and messy. And we know that it's sloppy. It's not a precise process. It's just based on like the differential affinities biochemically that these different molecules have for each other. And certain variants of the molecules are more likely to interact than other variants. And like it, oh man, it's just, they treat this like it's like the motor for like a Formula One car, and it's not. It's like when I was a kid, I made this like little transmission system with like a series of gear ratios out of Connects. I don't know if any of you were the right age to have had Connects when you were a kid, but like I made this thing where I could crank the handle like this, and there was something at the other end that would spin like 1,000,000 miles per hour, but it was all made out of these little plastic pieces. And like sometimes the gears would like shift relative to each other, and it would just like stop and start to fall apart. Like that's how biology and biochemistry works. It's like, it's not precise. It's not well made. It's not efficient. Oh my God, it's not efficient. They have these animations, but that's not how it works in real life.
Oh, and humans are so non-exceptional in all of this too. Like this applies to all of life, right? Like the complexity of various systems applies across the tree of life, and they allow for some change. So like, again, we always come back to the same question: what kind of change can evolve, and what kind of change must be designed, right? Yeah. And they'll never have an answer for that.
Yeah, and I'll say that some organisms do it better than us, right? So like if you think about like ribosomal efficiency, like translational efficiency is much better in bacteria than it is in us. The like rate at which they can transcribe is much faster than us. It's because their ribosomes, their polymerases aren't as bloated as ours are. Like if you look at our like the protein complex of a ribosome is like really, really bloated in a lot of eukaryotes, and in bacteria they don't have that, so they don't have near the slog that we do in eukaryotes.
That's what that was what I was thinking of when he said like, oh, it's so perfect. It's like, really? Are you sure about that? With how often mutations crop up?
E. coli get more ATP per glucose molecule than we do in cellular respiration. Like, there's costs to being more complex. There are costs associated with that. Like, that's not an optimal setting in all scenarios.
Like, think about how wasteful like being a mammal is, right? Like how much fat we have to break down to generate heat, for instance. Yeah,
right. Being an endotherm are
ridiculously wasteful.
Yeah, our metabolic efficiency is extraordinarily low because we on purpose basically just waste a bunch of it as heat. Like that's the point.
Yeah, you got to bypass.
And that's a tremendously
go ahead. The electron transport chain. Yeah, to generate heat. Yeah, that's crazy.
Right. It's a tremendously inefficient way to transfer the energy from a molecule of glucose or a hydrocarbon into ATP. Mm-hmm. You lose a ton of heat along the way. Like way more heat is lost in us compared to an ectotherm or a bacterium, right? It's just, yeah. This is related to a couple things that you just mentioned there. We replicate our DNA because it gets mutations. Yeah, that line, he just kind of sneaks that line in there, right?
Yeah.
What?
Yeah.
Guys, that's the fall, though. Come on, that's the fall. The fall did that.
But we replicate it because what? It's like he thinks that
we
the
get a
polymerase
mutation and then we have to replicate it.
I said it was the fall, you guys.
Right. I had never heard that before, and I can't make sense of it. We replicate our DNA, like it gets mutations, therefore we have to replicate it. It's like he thinks that the polymerases fix the mutations.
He doesn't know. Like we know that he does not know. Like he's repeating talking points that he read in, some Jeffrey Tompkins blog or a Rob Carter, if God is willing blog, and that's what ended up on this PowerPoint, right. And he does not understand it.
Hopefully it's Rob Carter and not Jeffrey Tompkins.
Please save us, Rob Carter. Save us from this.
Rob, if you ever see this, Rob, you need to fix Yek.
He's the only one who can do it. Him and New Creation are the only ones.
It's like, save us, Obi-Wan Carter. You're only yeah.
I need Rob Carter to like climb Mount Everest and from the summit start to reconstruct on site young Earth creationism. Okay. That's the only way. He would need a setting to match the task.
Okay. So we're gonna play this for again. Like about 2 minutes we're going to go because he has a long section here, beginning of life. So this is actually one of the things on his list. It's the abiogenesis, of course. If you had abiogenesis on your bingo cards, now is the time to check it off. If you're playing the drinking game, here's your origins or bust right here. So we're going to let this go. There's a lot to catch in here. So panel, take notes as we go. And we're going to have plenty to talk about in 2 minutes. I would say enjoy, but we all know we won't.
Well, the evolutionists would say, well, actually, no, this is how everything got started. We evolved from pond scum. Well, did you know that this is actually the best place to start with evolutionists? We believe as a ministry it takes God to know God. I think people have to be regenerate before they can really start seeing the truth of creation. But if you get into a dialogue with an evolutionist, that should be your first question. In fact, we dialogue with people all the time online, and we say they want to ask us all of these questions about the flood, and what about all the different ethnic groups, and what all these different things. And we say, well, look, let us get the first question, and if you can answer this question using real science, using observational science with the scientific method where you can see and observe and test and repeat things and falsify a hypothesis, I'm talking about real science, we pose to them and say, if you can answer this one question using real science, and you can answer anything, ask anything you want of us. And the first question we ask them is, how did non-living matter become alive? And did you know they cannot answer that using observational science? They have to answer with faith. They have to answer with faith, because when you look at the individual cell and they say, well, simple cells just evolved. They just sprung out of the mud pit 3.5 billion years ago. Well, that's a simple cell for you. It's much more sophisticated than a city. That's just one human cell, and you've got all these parts and components that have to work together. And by the way, when a cell dies, can we bring it back to life again? No. So what is that? When that cell just stops, who breathed the life into it to begin with? So that is not a simple cell. There is no such thing as a simple cell. But so that is the best question to ask an atheist, is simply this: how did non-living matter become alive? But you have to constrain it and say, answer the question with real science, which means you have to observe, test, and repeat it. They've been trying the Miller-Urey experiment for decades, and they still can't get even close to creating something even like that simple cell, or how the proteins would originally merge together to bring about life. So this is...
Oh, AI slop. AI slop. Biddle AI slop.
Boo. Okay. All right. So we'll get to the AI slop in a minute, but let's just appreciate the beginning of that with the abiogenesis thing. This is the best question to ask. We believe it takes God to know God, yada yada yada, right?
So okay, it's a logical, plausible, probable / James Tour kind of argument. It's the fruit of a poison tree. We've heard this a gazillion times, and the only reason they have to boil it down to this is because they actually cannot handle any of the data with regard to actual evolutionary theory. They can't tackle it. They actually don't have the manpower to tackle it. There's too few of them to actually try to tangle with some of these data sets. But I think it's really interesting, the idea, like that idea conceptually speaking, that if you can't show where literally all life came from and reproduce it in a lab, you can't say anything about biology. Well, we don't constrain any other area of science in that way.
They have a fundamental misunderstanding of how science works.
Yeah.
That they believe that if you didn't literally see it, then it's not science. And that's just never been how science works, right? Like we make a hypothesis and we can like make inferences about things, right? So we make a hypothesis and then we can test it by manipulating things in the lab and infer what might have happened given what we observed in a lab setting, right? So it's not like you have to go back and like literally observe the first cell emerging to say we know how the first cell likely emerged. Like that's just fundamentally not how science works.
Well, they don't apply that to forensics, right? Like Dan Biddle wouldn't get in front of a stage at like a conference for forensic anthropology and tell them that their entire field is bunk, because if they didn't directly observe the crime happening, then they can't say anything about the crime, right? Like it's absolutely absurd.
Yeah.
So that whole like bait and switch there, I want to point this out for everybody as an example of the tactics that we see here. Because he said you have to start with this question, where does life come from? But then 20, 30 seconds later, it was, where does life come from using observational science, which is this fake dichotomy that the Yeks always use, the observational versus historical science. And they like to claim that evolution is the historical science, and therefore it's less reliable, yada yada yada. In none of this discussion of like science and confidence in anything do they ever like get to the point of hypothesis testing. And as Zach just described, right, we're looking at what happens now. We're making hypotheses based on the way we think things work, and then we draw predictions from those, and those predictions are directly testable, right? If life arose through a certain biochemical pathway, then we need to be able to find these molecules in whatever sedimentation from the whatever, right? Like the presence or absence of the data that tests those predictions, those are direct observations that we're making in the present. You don't have to physically see the event occur to be able to know about the event. And
it's like, I mean, they would go back and they would say the early geneticists weren't really doing science because they didn't see the gene, right? That though they could predict
they couldn't see the chromosomes.
They could predict like, okay, based on if inheritance is discrete, then it should occur in this proportion. It occurred in that proportion, but you didn't see exactly what the heritable material was. Therefore, then it wasn't really observational science. Then was it? That's so preposterous.
So Zach, I'm a little foggy. It's been probably a couple weeks since I've read up on it and finished scripting for that topic, at least because I'm doing a video on like the history of some of this stuff. But it's like, if memory serves, William Jennings Bryant, the guy who, the prosecution in the Scopes trial, did say that, not in the Scopes trial, but when he was asked about like, well, you're a creationist, creationists don't support science. And he was like, no, I love science. I like, their effectively version of observational science, because hypothesis testing in the scientific method wasn't something that they had actually enshrined in public education. So Brian had no idea at all what constituted science or how science was done, which is what allowed him to write off the, burgeoning field of genetics, which was at that time in the 1920s and or 1930s really coming of age.
So you're saying Jennings said that genetics wasn't a science because they hadn't seen the gene?
I'm saying Brian talked about a lot of these budding fields, including, like radiometric decay, which was coming, sort of coming onto the public consciousness. Things like genetics, where they were using like the immunological tests as well that they used to try to link some of the apes together. He was like, we're not observing any of that with our eyes, right? You're just making guesses. That's how he sort of characterized evolution. And the verbiage that he uses is identical to what you hear Kent Hovind spew on his channel last week, right? Lines on paper, just guesses, hypotheses strung together by, sort of fanciful religious beliefs, right? Like this has not changed in a century of time. But what's funny is that they've been sort of dragged into accepting at least some aspects of genetics, whereas they still spurn some of the other aspects. And William James Bryan wasn't even a young Earth creationist, which is what made some of his positions kind of weird. It's interesting.
I mean, neither was Gunter Beckley, but he still talked about like species fixity or something very similar to it.
That's true.
In the fossil record.
This is, like the long arm of history kind of thing here is that, right, in 1920 and, a few years around there, you could probably get away with saying Mendelian genetics may not be true. Like there were still some bastions of argument among some people about Mendelian genetics by 1920. But like, look in retrospect, those people like are embarrassing now, that they took so long to come around to it. And I feel like, that we're just seeing the same sorts of things play out in many of young Earth creationist arguments.
I got two things real quick. First, I want to welcome our friend TD Lane because we were, in our cabal, saying, he's got thoughts on Dan Biddle. So in a second, TD, I want to invite you to share your thoughts on, actually take a minute to introduce yourself and then share your thoughts. But before we get to you, I just want to point out a realization that I just had about young Earth creationists. And it's this: young Earth creationists are science NIMBYs. For anyone who doesn't know what a NIMBY is, right, that means not in my backyard. And if you're familiar with any attempt to build like an apartment building or affordable housing at all in your municipality, you'll know that there's always somebody who goes to the meetings who's like, I'm not against new buildings, I'm not against affordable housing, but this one, it's too big, it's in the wrong place, right? They have a million reasons why this specific project is no good. But no, we're all for affordable housing. That's what young Earthers are for science. I love science, just not this science.
You can have your metro. You can have your metro, but it has to be 3 miles underground.
Right. It has to be, and it can't go near schools, churches, playgrounds. Yeah, right. It has to. Yeah, exactly. And if there's, you can build 4 stories, but if it's too much shade, yeah, it's yaks are science NIMBYs. I just had that realization, and that explains so much. So, TD, first, welcome, and tell everybody about you. For those of you who don't know, TD is, we've all been friends for many years at this point. It's so weird to say that. So welcome, and tell us about you.
Oh, goodness. I'm a geology student. I intend to go into geoarchaeology, actually. I'll be trying to do field school next year, so that's going to be cool. Goodness, I used to be really into this stuff and do it quite frequently, at least engaged, but college became more important by a significant margin.
Good.
And also just life. I've been packing for the past few months because we're moving to the other side of the continent, that kind of thing. I was
so
just
what are your thoughts?
Stream.
What are your thoughts on Dan Biddle? Because you popped in as we were hearing Dan Biddle butcher everything about abiogenesis, and you had thoughts.
Man, I just, whenever I hear this, it's like my automatic response is I'm going to walk away because this is a nothing burger, and B, it's not like honest argumentation because they do it to shut down argument, basically, to get a gotcha. And it's just, you're not here to actually talk about this, to learn. You're here to go, har, you don't have an answer to this because it's an active field of study that doesn't have much money in it because, corporations won't put money into it and our grants just got slashed into hell. But it's one of those things where it's not productive that much to talk about. They do it to get gotchas, and they don't actually understand anything about it. Because, frankly, it doesn't matter that much actually to evolution, whether or not it's God who created life or if life came about by itself. Because it doesn't have any bearing, because evolution can still happen either way. And they want to ignore that, because the second you say God could have created life, they'll go, okay, so he created everything. There's no winning with this.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that like the theoretical basis of evolution doesn't begin until you have a replicator capable of generating variation. When there's a replicator that generates variation, now you can talk about evolution. But prior to that, there's like nothing to even consider.
I mean, what does organic and inorganic matter even mean? I just like, because are you talking about like organic chemical molecules, or are you talking like matter? It's like, what are you even talking about? Because I don't think you understand anything of what you're saying. If you're just spewing out an argument without understanding any of the underlying science.
Or they're deliberately leaving it out / misrepresenting, because if you follow the premise of, if you don't accept Genesis chapters 1 through 11, then the whole rest of the enterprise falls apart. If you accept that premise, that's a very risky thing strategically.
Yeah,
because then if you have somebody who like learns about radiometric dating and accepts it as valid, then they're not just going to not be a young earth creationist anymore. They're not going to be a Christian anymore, right? If they accept you need to accept Genesis for the rest of it to work. So I think you're exactly right that the purpose explicitly is to underinform and or misinform.
I think like the anthropological thing at the core of this is just an understanding, like a misunderstanding of just religion as a whole as a cultural concept, to where if the mythological basis isn't true, then oh no, you can't have the religion, and that's just not true, because religion serves a bigger purpose than just creation. It's just a cultural concept as well.
My opinion is that I think creationism is just a bludgeon to sort of push sociocultural ideas that they like, right?
Absolutely.
Like creationism is just the broad net that they use to bring people in so that they can, spew their culture war nonsense. It's been like that since the dawn of time too.
Oh goodness, yeah.
Yeah, it's let's not forget. I mean, that's exactly it, right? This is all fundamentally not about the science. The science is the window dressing, but this is all about culture war, and that goes back. There's fantastic books on this. Jesus and John Wayne is a really good book on this. The Power Worshippers is a really good book on this.
The Wedge document, cough.
I mean,
the Wedge document, right?
Oh my goodness!
And if you go back to like the 60s, 70s, 80s, you'll have religious schools, Bob Jones University, Liberty University, as basically proxies for culture war issues, where it didn't start even with abortion. If you go back to the 70s, which, by the way, that didn't become the issue until 4 or 5 years after Roe, because before that it was segregation was the issue. And when public schools were desegregated, you had the religious institutions that, under the guise of religious freedom, were able to maintain segregation across the South. And then once that was basically forced out of their toolkit in the late 70s, that's when they switched to abortion as the culture war topic du jour. But it wasn't, it wasn't correlated with Roe. It was correlated with other political developments.
Oh,
which
and
shows
the
you that the whole
stuff,
thing is bad faith.
Dan, have you read the stuff about like what Bob Jones tried doing, where they admitted like one singular black student, and then we're like, you're here, you're not allowed to date anyone. You're like, you have to be like separate from the other student, the white students. Like they tried to have this one student to get around that, and the IRS like, no,
you can't do that. It's all been, so you can see that in the 90s it was all anti-gay stuff, and now it's the anti-trans crusades, and it's all
still also anti-gay.
Yes.
That too. But they there's the rear guard action on Obergefell, but they've it's always just whatever the culture war thing is, and this is all window dressing for that.
So
the
so you'll
very
get
the very first time that this welled up was in the very early 1900s, right? And it was right when World War II was roiling up, and the United States was having a bunch of big socio-cultural changes. There's jazz, there's these discussions about prohibition, there's women in the women starting to be in the workplace, women petitioning for the right to vote. There's lots of tension in the North and in the South as Black families move up northward for jobs, and people move towards into the cities as well for jobs. And all of this massive change sparks this huge debate within the fundamentalists and led to the emergence of the fundamentalists as an actual movement, because they were like, too much change is happening too quickly. Who can we pin the blame on? Right. And William Jennings Bryan happened to pick up a book that argued that Bolshevism, which William Jennings Bryan thought was
the Jews.
Yeah, right. Let's just be clear. Bolshevism
My
means
fault.
capital T, capital J, the Jews. That's what that
Right,
means.
yeah.
It's me. I'm the one who did.
Yeah.
He was JQing, right? And so he
Right.
saw that he argued that what it was Haeckel pushing evolutionary theory in Germany. And there was this small little pamphlet. And then because he ran for president 3 times, he whips everybody up into this frenzy. And that's how you get the anti-evolution movement of the 1920s. And then it happens again in the 1960s. And of course, it happens just at the same time as the big countercultural movement. There's massive changes happening. It's like clock.
Erica,
And it's weird because it's not happening again right now.
Hey, Erica, it sounds like somebody should write a book on that.
I am so, this is
Just
my
saying.
soapbox right now. You
I'm
have no
just
idea.
saying.
And my thesis statement, which I've been telling people right now, is that the reason why we're not, even though there's massive cultural turmoil happening right now, the reason evolution isn't, there isn't this big creationism movement anymore, why people have moved past that, is one, because it's been normalized in the very brief stretch of time between the 1990s and now, where public education was kind of decent on this kind of thing. But two, and more importantly, they shifted it after Kitzmiller versus Dover, and now woke is holding the bag for all of this shit. What used to be evolution's fault is now woke.
Yeah.
So,
whatever woke is.
So, Erica, I'm gonna in the stuff that I've been reading a lot recently, my kind of thought, and I'm curious to hear your own, is I think that creationism is like a hanger-on, but I don't think it's a primary like wedge in the like anti-science movement. My thinking is that like when you have like the like free market fundamentalist neoliberal movement that really came into, or that was first getting kind of discussed in like the 1950s. You have like the Mont Pelerin Society, and then later you have the Chicago School here in the US, and you start getting these ideas disseminated. And then the outgrowth of that from the Chicago School to the Republican Party, for instance, and their the associated conservative libertarians, you have those guys who start pushing for deregulation, who are then forming these groups that are like anti-science, but only anti-specific types of science. So anti-environmentalism, so anti-anthropogenic climate change and acid rain and the hole in the ozone layer. And so once you already have these public-facing anti-science movements that are fueled by industry, so lots of money, then creationism kind of slides in and kind of hooks onto that as a side kind of thing, because you already have a lot of anti-science that has been fomented by these groups. What do you think about that?
I agree with that completely, and I think that's exactly what happened. Every subsequent wave of the anti-evolution sentiment is what like Adam Latz calls it, right? It's like every time that happens, it's in accordance exactly with what you're saying. But all of the right pressure points are there and have been there for about half a decade for it to happen again, but it hasn't. And that's the weird part. It's shifted focus. The entire landscape seems to have moved. And I talked to the guy who wrote Summer of the Gods about the Scopes trial about this, because he came and spoke at my university.
Yeah,
and I was
just want to say we are going to move on in a few minutes.
Oh, sorry.
Use your thought.
I was like, listen to my hypothesis, and I pitched it to him. And he was like, no, I think that tracks. And I think the reason is threefold. The reason evolution hasn't been swept up into the most recent hardcore anti-science movement that is arguably stronger than it's ever been in the United States. The reason it hasn't been swept up is one, weirdly enough, I think the internet has played a huge role. I think people brought up on the internet and knowing how to use it has completely defanged a lot of the arguments against evolution because they're just so easy to debunk that you don't have to have very much know-how to hop on top origins, and something like that doesn't exist for climate change or vaccine denial or so on and so forth. Number two, because of the internet, evolution acceptance has become normalized and denying evolution has become shameful. And I think that those two sociocultural factors has led to, it's just not cool. You just can't get away with it, which is why Matt Walsh and Ben Shapiro, pretty much everybody besides Candace Owens, the younger conservative talking heads, will be, completely moronic on half the subjects on science that they deign to talk about. But they'll be like, yeah, obviously evolution happened. God guided it. Who cares? And then the last thing is, again, they found something else to hold the bag. In the interim, when evolution wasn't getting the job done, right around the Obama era stuff in 2008, after Kitzmiller versus Dover, the Republicans smartly, unfortunately, shifted their focus and stuck, woke, whatever you want to add, woke DEI,
multiculturalism,
multiculturalism. That's
I
what's now
remember. I'm old enough to remember the Obama phone scandal. Who remembers Obama phones, right? Which was just a very textbook, like, be scared of brown people kind of scandal. Yeah. And then as Maya, actually, here we go. Maya has it right here. So Stay Woke originated in the early 20th century. And then later on, and like much later, like 100 years later, it didn't become well known in conservative circles or picked up in conservative circles until around 2020, because before that, coming out of Gamergate, you had the social justice warrior thing, right? That was
I'm actually having Matt Dillahunty on tomorrow, and we're going to be talking about the evolution of the internet in that time period and the anti-SJW stuff.
Man. So
I think there is one additional component here, and that is that the right is less religious. The direction of the right is actually towards more of
young
a
dudes
style, and it's a lot of young white guys that actually don't care about religion. They care about the fact that they can't get girlfriends, right?
That is a very good point. To where
so it's just evolution is not something they're going to be talking about. They care about a lot masculinity and a lot of things that are actually
or they come into it. TD, I want to go to you in just a second, but I just want to say on that, or they come into it, as we've been saying, backdoor as a secondary issue, almost through an Evo Psych red pill kind of lens, right?
God,
with gender role stuff. That's how they end up getting into the anti-evolution, because it all kind of congeals together, but it's not the main thing. Yeah. TD, go ahead.
Yeah. So as it stands, the Republican Party has to maintain its coalition of the religious right, the remaining fiscal conservatives, those sort of conservative moderates, and most importantly, the base, now that's growing, the fascists. And the fascists are in that area, as they always are, of not being very religious, generally being kind of jerks, that kind of thing. So it's fascinating as to where they'll use religion as a tool to forward themselves, even if they don't believe it. And it's fascinating because it's what a lot of the German leaders in World War II did.
It's bringing this
religion and used it as a tool to push their agendas forward.
Bringing this full circle, though, that's why that sign, "Don't be ashamed about believing in Genesis 1:1" is back there, because this is no longer a viable position. They can't worm their way into the Republican Party and sort of utilize their leverage to force the Republicans to acquiesce to them and include them in their platforms. Like the Rick Santorum stuff back in 2005, when the religious right, the moral majority had of the anti-evolution on platforms for Republicans, and that just does not happen anymore. And so the question that's so interesting to me about this is that it's when Texas is arguing right now about putting the 10 Commandments in their public schools, there's there's way less anti-evolution legislature than there has been in the past. It's so bizarre, and I'm so curious. It's surprising, and I'm curious to see whether that sticks in this, whether it's finally been overwhelming enough to stick.
I think that's going to be later. I think that's gonna be kind of coattails, whereas all this stuff kind of starts to run out of steam. I think they're gonna try to get use anti-evolution stuff as kind of a shot in the arm to keep things going. But we'll see. Okay, that was an excellent digression. And, this is, folks, remember, this is a science channel, and we do anti-creationism science
Well,
here.
it's
But
all
that
related.
was
You know,
really
I do have
excellent.
one.
And the level of
Dan?
detail in some of that was excellent. Thank you. TD, go
I
ahead.
do
and
have
we're gonna move
one
on.
caveat, which is it also depends on where you're looking. Because if you're looking at somewhere like, say, Louisiana, you're going to have very different Republican politics to Florida or Virginia.
Yeah.
we're pretty similar to Florida in a lot of issues.
That's true, but it's one of those things where the level
You
of
know.
how religious their run right is going to
I
vary.
mean, I think that I think it's all. I agree that it's performative. I think to jump off of Erica's example, the Rick Santorum, or sorry, it wasn't Rick Santorum. It was Governor was it Perry of Texas?
Rick Perry.
Who was pro. Who by executive order was like, children, young females are going to get the HPV vaccine, but immediately reneged on that when his base said, no, we don't like that. We actually want women to get cancer. And which is why I think like he obviously sees the value in the vaccine and young girls and women not getting cancer.
Cancer.
He didn't, like, his brain wasn't on the same much lower level as his base, because it's performative, and that was an extremely obvious example of it being performative.
Nobody does the performative better than Trump, right? He is like, no one thinks he cares about any of this shit, but he still caters to that audience to get votes, right? Okay. We could do this all night. We are going to continue with Genesis Apologetics. One thing that I want to point out from this segment on abiogenesis is he says the simplest cell is more complex than a city. And then he shows this.
A modern eukaryote.
A modern eukaryote, not just any modern eukaryotic cell. This is the textbook version. Like, literally, I use a version of this picture in class.
Right.
And this is the textbook version of eukaryotic cell that's like, remember in 4th grade when you had like the geography where it was like a mountain and a hill and a mesa and a plateau and a cape and a gulf, right? It's that, but for a cell. It has all the parts, right? This isn't a real cell. This is just showing all the parts together. And he gestures at this like, look at what the first cell would have had to look like.
It a simple cell.
My guy.
This argument, he has to show, if he's being honest, intellectually honest, he has to show the simplest possible cell that we can deduce, hypothetically. Which is what?
Which is not this.
Lipid membranes, cytoplasm, some RNA and some proteins, basically, or something like that.
It's not going to be this. Okay. So so we've got the showing the eukaryotic cell as representative of the first cell, and this illustrates something that we've all pointed out before in various ways, which is that nobody, including the 5 of us, has less respect for YEC audiences than professional young Earth creationists. Nobody has less respect for those audiences than the people in front of the room that are just going to be like, I'm going to lie to you. It just
like on the off chance that a young Earth creationist is watching this at some point, which I would love that if that was the case. The people who are preaching this to you, they think you're stupid. Like full stop. They think you're stupid. And in fact, we've seen this rhetoric play out. Remember the Harry F. Sanders saga over at Answers in Genesis, where he was straight up like, guys, the congregation cannot handle the subtleties of young Earth creationists disagreeing with one another. If they see us disagreeing, they will leave, and so we need to present them with a unified front. They are literally not smart enough to handle this. And it's like, this is what they think of you.
Yeah. For anyone not familiar with that saga, that was the Young Earth Evolutionist saga. You should all check out our friend Joel Duff's channel. He covered that in detail. It was fantastic. You should all check that out. But that was quite a thing. That several months of articles from our friend Harry F. Sanders III. All right. So the other last little line in here that I just want to throw to y'all for like 30 seconds, and if your response for those 30 seconds is to just chuckle, that's fine too. But about how we've been doing Miller-Urey for decades.
Oh, it wasn't you can't revive a dead cell? That wasn't your
Yeah, there's
last
also you
one?
can't revive a dead cell. Yeah, it's just like
That's
nonsense in
James
here.
That's the James Tour line. You can't
I
revive
just-
it. Can't bring
You
it back to
can't
life.
revive a dead person either.
For anyone,
Well, someone can. Someone can, TD. Only one person can.
I
My
don't believe in
boy.
that.
drum kit.
Believe me. Believe
Okay.
me.
My first instinct was that you were talking about Frankenstein. I don't know why that's where my brain went.
That was
I was like,
Zach.
oh,
That was
Frankenstein
multiple
reference.
things.
Very Shelley.
Also, Frankenstein was the person, not the monster. Get it right.
But
we can
Frankenstein
ask
is
the
the one that
question,
revived the
Okay, you
monster.
revive. Okay, Frankenstein. Yeah,
Dan,
okay.
Dan, who was the real monster? What he has created, or is the folly of man the real monster? So Frankenstein might
We're done.
actually be the
Okay,
monster.
all
as
right.
The
well.
modern Prometheus.
I actually go over new iterations of the Miller experiment in one of my lectures to my biology class, because I point out this is the original, this is what they got, and then let me rephrase. This is what they thought they got. Later was like, oh crap, they actually got way more than they initially thought, because we came up with better
I do the same
chromatograph methods.
I do the same
And then
thing.
I also show them like, hey, here's a bunch of other experiments that have built on that initial little kernel of the Miller experiment. But like, we've done a few things. Like, we've added, like, they've changed how the electricity interacts with the gases in it, or they changed like which it's like magnesium, like a clay that they use instead of glass. And there's like all sorts of different like little changes that make, and then therefore cause different organic products to be made, different amino acids, nucleotides, carbohydrates, things like that.
Jackson?
Science advances. We're going to keep going. Otherwise, we're going to be here all night. But
Sorry.
fortunately, there is a lot less science left to talk about because
Okay, but
There wasn't much
Yeah.
to begin with.
there wasn't much to begin with. Okay, so we're going to just see right now, we are going to do just a little bit here because he starts talking about how paradigm dictates belief, and then he does the genealogies, and like, this is in the science part, and he does the genealogies. We don't need to do this. Okay. We don't need to do it. Okay. This
it.
is where
I'm
I
here.
am going to play a little bit of this for Erica because
Yes,
this is,
I know the part.
yeah. So let's do this. I want to make sure I don't miss it. So we'll go back to
Scripture says in Luke chapter 3 that Jesus has a lineage of over 70 patriarchs to Abraham below them in the line. I had a
Let's be
kid,
clear,
I
this
named
is
him such and
fan
such, and
fiction.
then this person named him such and such. You can go all the way back through this line, and you get
Don't care. Hang on.
Adam, the Son of God.
Here you go.
So you really absolutely break Scripture if you want to insert there between the son of Adam, the Son of God. You say, well, the son of a Neanderthal, the son of a Homo sapien, the son of a Australopithecine, the son of a Homo habilis. If you start inserting other things in there, you literally have to snap Scripture and insert the viewpoint of man, because there's
All right, Erica, take it away. I'll give you a few minutes to rant here.
I mean, it doesn't matter if you're going forward or backward. The order is wrong no matter what. Like, he was just like, can I name hominins? He was like, I think I can name a couple of them. He's like a Neanderthal. Okay, fine, whatever. Homo sapiens, right? Australopithecus, Homo habilis. Is that the order that he said?
Yeah, so he went 2, 1, 4, 3. Is that what he did?
He means okay. For those of you out there, it's the Australopiths, right? Your Australopiths. Then you have your early genus Homo, so Homo habilis, and then you would have Homo sapiens and Homo neanderthalensis as sister taxa splitting off right around the same time from like a if you believe in that kind of thing, Homo heidelbergensis like critter, which these days we're just calling it early sapiens and early neanderthalensis, but. I mean, Dan Biddle has zero respect for paleoanthropology. He does not. He's like a Lucy as an Uncle Walker kind of guy, which is a completely indefensible position to have 30 years ago, let alone now. So it's fine, whatever.
If you'd like to learn more about this, watch Erica's videos or take an anthropology class.
Or read a book. Or a Wikipedia
book.
even.
But not contested bones. You will learn negative information.
You die.
You'll de-learn.
And it's incredible, guys. It's actually incredible because Roop's presentation is different from what Contested Bones says, and he wrote that book. He wrote the book. He's already.
But then he plugs it.
These out.
But he plugs it in the talk. Well, you'll do that one, I'm sure.
Oh my God.
Okay, so this section, I'm just going to play a little bit of this because the point is that ears had to evolve immediately. It's an irreducible complexity. Ears had to spring into existence all at once thing. So I'm just going to give you a little taste of this. We don't need to do like the whole 3 minutes of it. But Jackson, this got your name written all over it. Okay, so here you go.
Quickly ex nihilo about how he breathed humans into existence, because if you just take the human hearing system with its 5 different parts, as I'm breathing around and speaking today, I'm pushing around air molecules which are being trapped by your pinna, your outside of your ear, which is specifically engineered for trapping the air molecules that I'm pushing.
Oh my God, that's not.
That was a weird way to say that, but okay.
That little wiggle by 1.7 times. Then your body upsamples it again 22 times by going from a dry mechanical force from air into water, because those 3 little bones are pushing on a hammer, anvil, and stirrup. They're pushing on your cochlea, which is charged with water and fluid, and the sound signals travel much more freely through fluid. Potassium and the calcium ratio in your cochlea, so what's heard as speech goes through a mechanical process.
Yeah, he butchers his own slide here, so I'll just show you the slide where he does.
It goes through mechanical,
sound waves,
hydraulic,
mechanical,
chemical, and
hydraulic,
electrical
blah, 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 blah,
processes.
blah. Okay.
There's what those little tiny microscopic, when they pull apart, they're upper nim.
Okay, no, we don't need to hear that.
When they pull apart, they're going to change the ratio of calcium and potassium in your cochlea, and that's going to transmit to an electrical signal.
Okay. Ears are irreducibly complex and had to evolve all at the same time in order to have occurred. Jackson, I know this is your wheelhouse. Go for it.
That's so wrong on every level. I mean, if you just look at vertebrates, right? Because our modern ear system, you track that from vertebrates, right? So when you look at, actually, it starts with, in a weird place, it starts with gills, believe it or not, because your first gill opening is what becomes your ears. So in fish, if you look at like a cartilaginous fish, well, the ones that haven't reduced that spiracle, right? So you have your spiracle, which is set apart from your other gills because it's separated from them by the jaw, right? So your jaw forms between the first and the second gill opening. Well, that spiracle goes to the back of the throat, as your gills are wont to do, and your ears also do the same exact thing. In us, that tube that goes from your inner ear to the back of your throat, that is called your eustachian tube, but in sharks, rays, other fish like bashirs and those sorts of guys, it is called the spiracular tract. Now, the first inner ear bone, the stapes, is actually derived from a fish skull bone. It's called the hyomandibular. So the hyomandibular got moved kind of back and down and is used for sound conduction. Now, as it happens, all of your bones, in your skull can actually function sound conduction, right? I mean, yeah, they're just going to do that.
There's speakers you could put so they're not in your ears; they could be against your skull. It's really cool.
Yeah, exactly. So it's like you can do that regardless. What the function of moving and honing the hyomandibular for sound conduction, what that did was that made it better at receiving and transmitting sound to your brain. And the same was true for when within the mammal line, we took our articular and quadrate and moved them from our jaw up into our ear for the malleus and incus. And those also, again, functioned in sound conduction, but those are now much better at that job because they've been moved up into your inner ear. And fun fact, when you are a little embryo developing, the malleus and incus start actually in your jaw as cartilage condensates, and then they move up into your inner ear or your middle ear. And that's so weird if you're if you were created by God, directly, right? Why does it that our middle ear bones have to come from our jaw? That's just very weird.
It's also weird that you can chart that migration through fossil mammalia forms, right? Like and earlier groups, like through synapsids. As you get more specific from synapsids, you can watch this happen. They hone themselves through time. Like none of that should be happening.
Oh, and
it's
Erica,
also
there was
strange. It's strange that it happens to also have a clear, obvious evolutionary advantage to it as well.
Yep. Yeah, what's cool about that is there was a paper that came out a few years ago that actually looked at how this process of moving those jaw bones up and then back was occurring at the same time that mammal ancestors were downsizing. So there was this specialization on insects as their jaw was changing in shape and they were losing bones and reducing them and moving them. So this was for streamlines. There was actually a selection for streamlining the jaw for insect eating, as well as moving those bones back for sound conduction.
That is so cool, Jackson, because you probably know this, but the best hypothesis right now for the origin of primates is like our insectivorous hypothesis. This idea that primates evolved essentially to capture insects with dexterous grasping hands. And the reason is because this happens at the same time that primates get binocular vision, right? And it's also the same time that the areas of the brain that are responsible for that hand-eye coordination just explode in brain case size. And that's what gives primates as an order that initial boost that sets them apart from like the next highest EQ primate or EQ mammal, which is carnivorans. It's really cool.
That I didn't know that there's that is really cool. I would like to see a paper on that. If you could send that to me at some point.
We are going to go back to Biddle in just a minute.
One more thing I wanted to give you, Erica, for your and I'll send you the paper on this for your arsenal. This is a paper I just came across the other day, and this absolutely blew my mind. So when, as you all know, birds are this is in the similar veins. That's why it's relevant. So birds have a pubis that points backwards, right? Whereas that's why the ornithischian dinosaurs, like iguanodon, stegosaurus, etc., are called ornithischians because it's the pubis points backwards rather than forwards. Whereas the saurischians, like sauropods and theropods, have that initially forward pointing pubis. Well, wouldn't you know, during the embryonic development of birds, they initially have that ancestral forward-pointing pubis, which is the ancestral condition for tetrapods. But it gets even better than that because as it starts moving backwards, it actually develops what is called a pubic boot. And that is a feature that only existed in early to Tetanuran theropods that then disappeared later in theropod evolution before the evolution of birds. So they actually... as it's going backwards, it briefly develops a pubic boot, and then the pubic boot disappears as it continues going backwards.
Crazy.
Why would that happen?
We're gonna move on here because there's surprisingly little left. I know it looks like we're only like 2/3 to 3/4 of the way through this, but we're actually within like 2 minutes of Biddle being done talking about science. But I just want to point out for everyone's amusement that as Jackson was talking about the evolution of pubic bones in different taxa, I hit my all-time high number of live viewers ever. So thank you for that. So thank you, Jackson, for I appreciate that. Really bringing the eyeballs to
it was Erica. It wasn't me. I don't know what you're saying.
There you go. All right. So let's keep going, folks. Dan, there are... Oh, go ahead.
Me, a highly cultured primate, eating my favorite meal, bug.
I'm putting this in the side chat and I'm with the private chat in the side chat. It's a Matt Cartmill special, which I got to be at Matt Cartmill's retirement party 2 years ago at the ABAs. The official name of the hypothesis is the visual predation hypothesis. It really changed the game. It's a 1974 paper. Hopefully everybody has access to it, but Dan, take it away.
Okay. All right. So we have in Dan Biddle's talk here, we have all of 3 minutes of like anything that could be construed as science left, despite you'll see there are far more than 3 minutes left in his thing here. So the first thing he does is he's going to talk about leafhoppers here. And I just need to highlight, where did I start the comment? I should have. Yeah, here we go. Let's just, Zach. Yeah. That's not how that works.
No, that drives me
rules. Tell me the rules
when people do this.
Yeah, this is bad.
you capitalize the genus, you never capitalize species.
Mm-hmm.
This is one of those things that drives me crazy. And if you really want to be particular, you should italicize.
You got to italicize it. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
But yeah,
This is bad.
I was trained originally as a taxonomist. Like my PhD advisor is a crustacean taxonomist. So I like took a hard turn into population genetics halfway through grad school. But yeah, she would be quite upset by this.
Yeah, this is really bad. When we do phylogenetics and taxonomy and stuff, it's just like, by the way, this is how you write it. In my class, I always say, look, like, I'm not a stickler for it, like, in terms of the formatting, but like, here's the formal way to do it. If you're writing a paper or giving a presentation, this is the formal way to do it. And that is not it.
But like, the thing about it is that it's like, I'm not a stickler about it either. But at the same time, those are students. Those are freshman students who are coming in and taking a class that is a core natural science credit for many of us who teach, right? It's like they're coming in, they're taking it, they're calling it a day. Mm-hmm. Dan Biddle is giving a presentation on the top 10 evidences against biology, and he can't even write the name of a species
get it
correct.
Right. Anyway.
So it's a little, like I do
it's petty,
expect
but get it right.
better. Yeah.
We don't even have to look, we don't have to listen
confidence.
we don't have to listen to this part. I'm going to show you all the picture and you're all going to know exactly what it is that he shows. And everybody remembers the leg gear paper. Everybody remembers the leg gear paper. Like the creationists were all over the leg gear paper. Yeah. The leaf hopper thing.
Is it 2020 again?
It's whatever year this was. Yeah. It's the leg gear thing and it's designed and it couldn't have evolved. It looks like gears. Therefore it needed a designer. That's it. That's like a minute and a half. There's no substance to it. It's just, it looks designed. That's it. And then the last one, and this one's only about 2 minutes and change. And I'm going to let this play because we got to appreciate this one. And then that's going to be the end of the actual science content, if you can call it that. So let's let this last little bit play. For those of you who don't know what's coming, you're welcome.
Small like that to big. This is the only creature in the whole Bible that God brags about because he's talking to Job and he says, hey, Job, consider Behemoth, which is a sauropod dinosaur, which I made along with you, like on the same sixth day of creation.
I just want to say, if you had Book of Job Behemoth on your bingo card, congratulations, come on down to collect your prize.
It is the chief of all of my works. And what the Hebrew is saying there is like, look at a ranked list of all the animals I made. This guy's the top one, the biggest, baddest thing that God ever made. And God gives 14 different characteristics about this creature. And they really don't fit any other animal besides a massive sauropod. Doesn't fit a hippo, doesn't fit an elephant. God says it's a chief. He says the mountains are going to yield food for him and all the beasts are going to play right beside this big creature. It's got a tail that sways like a cedar tree, huge stomach muscles. It can eat grass like an ox. Well, we're looking at another engineering feat. For this creature to live, you have to have compressive loading and tension loading all at the same time because you can't have the long neck without the long tail. You can't have the long tail without the long neck. So it's built like a suspension bridge. Talk with any engineer to see how could you have a 70,000-pound animal that can stretch across 6 freeway lengths, stand and move and turn around. It says, well, you would pretty much need a big tail and a big head at the same time. And you know, the more that you go up its vertebrae, the lighter and lighter they get up of its head. It's like they're made out of styrofoam. And God actually says he moves his tail like a cedar tree. The sinews of his thighs are tightly knit. And paleontologists have recently learned that, it had to sway its tail when it walked because there are connection points in the rear of its femur that would have pulled its tail side to side so it could get in a walking motion for efficiency of movement. God definitely did that. So when we take a look at that tail, we can start scaling it next to a human. Well, here's some tails from different dinosaur creatures. There's an Ankylosaurus, a Stegosaurus. Now the tails are getting bigger and bigger and bigger, all the way we end at a Titanosaur. So this is what its tail would have looked like when God brags about this creature and says, Job, consider Behemoth that has a tail that sways like a cedar tree. So God definitely...
I wish Dapper was here. He would love this.
There
Oh
you go.
yeah,
That's
I
what we got,
have
folks.
words.
It is interesting that that they like translated the sinews of his thighs instead
Yeah.
of
You're not. Well,
Go
as you
ahead.
know, Jackson, we're not supposed to interpret God's word. We're just supposed to read it as it's plainly written,
my mistake.
unless we have to interpret it to make sense of it.
Right.
Well, yeah, because the plain
Duh.
reading is just an elephant.
It's also weird that they interpret it as he moves his tail like a cedar instead of his tail is like a cedar, which is what the old creationists did to say that it was clearly a sauropod tail, right? And then
Yeah.
they changed. Apparently the textual criticism got to a point where it was pretty obvious that it was moves, and people who were critical of this idea, that is to say, most people, that the behemoth is a dinosaur, is a sauropod dinosaur, point out that the types of cedars that would have been around when people were putting this to paper in Job. Were like these scrubby little sad cedars that move a lot in the wind, which looks a lot like an elephant, which
Like
were
an
living in the
elephant
area at
stage,
the
yeah.
time. And that's how they move their tails, or hippopotamus for that matter.
Mhm.
Yeah,
So,
it's really painful because what this is we look at it anthropologically, because this is actually really valuable anthropologically, because and culturally this is an oral history that was only recorded on physical medium around the time the Greeks were messing around in what was then Judea. And so and by this point, elephants and hippos are locally extinct in the Levant and Egypt for centuries. The only way they're going to see an elephant here is if it's being brought west by the Seleucids from India or Iran, or if it's come from northwest Africa, or from south from Sudan. There is no other way you're going to see an elephant here. And they wouldn't immediately go an elephant is behemoth, because over time, what happens is these stories change. They get mythologized because no one's seen the animal in a long time. We see this here in the Americas with animals that may have at one point been based off of Pleistocene megafauna, but we don't know exactly because it's so far removed and they've been heavily mythologized and incorporated into the native spirituality that it's hard to determine those origins. We see it with other regions where you look at mythology or local spiritism, and you have where mythological creatures that are based on real creatures, but are different. They have been altered for the mythological narrative, or perhaps they represent something that no longer exists. It doesn't follow to assume this was real just because it's in a holy text, because that's not a logical thing to assume. Not to mention, you have animals that fit this description very well that still exist, but they've been differ slightly. And the final thing is, Lebanese cedar exists. It was highly prized for millennia because it was the only good hardwood in the region. Learn what region you're talking about, what wood you're talking about. Jeez.
To that point, too, why, if we're talking about a sauropod, are we spending so much time talking about the tail when the big thing that makes a sauropod interesting and pretty unique is its giant neck? Why doesn't it mention the neck?
Oh, crap, yeah.
Well, he did say that they have big heads, which is wrong.
They don't. Their heads are small.
Sure
Little
don't.
heads.
Their heads are tiny. They're comically tiny. Their heads are tiny for their body size because they aren't eating reeds or grasses. They're eating leaves from giant trees.
Yeah, right. You're not.
Doesn't he describes two monsters in this section, right? And doesn't
The
one of them
Leviathan.
breathe fire?
Yeah.
Yes.
So this is a thing that I remember distinctly growing up in a creationist household and having a mother that was really into like fantasy. And she was like, see, dragons were real once. And like, I don't know
Right.
if that just like really spoke to her because she was super into fantasy. But like, I remember thinking that the Bible had dragons in it, and this was the part of Job. So like, what's the fossil record for dragons? I don't know. Like,
We're small.
they-
We're small in the Bible.
The creationists actually, and RJ and I, one of the chapters in Rocks Volume 2, we go into this extensively, is creationists do, and I'm sure Eric can also talk about it, is they have a very long series of narratives about about like all these different dragon legends, whether it's from and I came across one of the hardest ones to find was there was one of the creationists described, or Kenham was repeating a claim that he got from somebody else, and he said a 10th century Irishman came across a stegosaur. Was one example. They'll use like Alexander the Great, like found giant dragons when he went to India, and whatever else.
In
right.
Egypt,
so the stegosaur one was super interesting because I couldn't find literally anything about it. I had no idea what he was talking about. I managed to track this claim. Like if you use, he copied it like quote or word for word from an older creationist, so a book back from like the 80s, and that creationist also said had that an Irishman encountered an animal that had nails like iron, which the creationist said was on the tail, had nails like iron. The Thagomizer, right? So I spent hours, literally hours. I'm like combing Irish mythology for something like this, and I finally came across a book that mentions nails like iron on the paws because it was a cat-like creature, not a stegosaur.
It's
called
a stegosaurus.
Yeah, it's called the kata, which might just mean cat because the word is very similar for I think in Gaelic. But yeah, it was he was saying nails like iron, but he was imagining, the creationist was imagining like hardware nails on its tail, not on the paws. It was so funny.
I just that's a really funny. B, the question I have there is cave lion memory? Question mark?
I think not for that area. I don't believe. I think it was just it was a cat mythology, right? And they were just beefing it up, and it had like a whale tail was the other thing about it.
Yeah.
But yeah. So they'll go and they'll do like cryptozoology. There's a big overlap between cryptozoology.
Mokele and Bembe.
Mokele and Bembe. They'll point to like petroglyphs that look kind of
the Habasupine dinosaur. Yeah. I love this. I love this subject.
Yeah, and so they'll do. So that's what they think happened to the dinosaurs. They think the dinosaurs became sort of narrativized in all these different cultures after they got off the ark, and humans kind of hunted them to extinction. That's what they think. And so, like, that's what creationists would say happened to dinosaurs is they became dragon legends.
Can I just say before actually, TD Lane, you go. Then I'm gonna segue us to the next thing.
Yeah, I just like, man, it's one of those things where you don't think about, but when you really think about it, it's like cryptozoology really is the intersection of creationism, colonialism, and then just people going, what was that? And their brain fills in the gaps. Because our brains do that.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
To me, the cryptozoology stuff is like the fun part about creation. Like, there's the nefarious parts about creationism that we can talk about, where it's like where it intersects with culture wars and does actual harm and is a gateway into other conspiracies. And then there's like the good stuff. I want to listen to Dwayne Gish tell me how Parasaurolophus could actually breathe fire by combining chemicals in his breast. That's what I want out of creationism.
The lore.
Okay.
How may I help you?
Okay. So before we go further down this rabbit hole, I wanna move us along here because we've been going for almost 2 hours. And folks, despite there being 10 minutes left in this stream, we're not gonna watch all 10 minutes. We're barely gonna watch any of it because that's the end for the science content. Of the 41 minutes here, the science content is from approximately minute 17 to minute 31. That's it. On either end, you get the scripture stuff, matters, and Genesis chapters 1 through 11 and everything. Right now, before we move on any further, we got a super chat. I want to just pull that up from Doug Meeks, evangelical pastor here, and it hurts me every time I hear Biddle attempt to communicate biblical science. Love this combined live stream, and that's for $9.99 US. Thank you, or for $9.99, I should say. Thank you, Doug. I appreciate it. Thank you for being here.
Thanks, Doug.
So what I want to just show here is I'm just going to show you all a smattering of the last 10 minutes of this because there's no science stuff to comment on here. It's, did God do this? Yes, here's how we know. It's all in the scripture. This matters theologically. So I'm going to jump around a little bit, and I want to just show a little bit of where he talks about, is it 6,000, 8,000, 10,000? It's all fine. And then we'll wrap this up. So let me just I'm going to skip around and just show you some stuff here.
Only started this just thousands of years ago, because let's consider scripture for a minute. If God was capable.
Let's consider scripture for a minute. Could be the title of this talk, right? I want to show you at, let's go to 30. Let's go here. Let's go all the way to 34. Yeah, we're going to quote Martin Luther in case you have any ideas of like where this is going. That's what we do at one point.
What a person's quote.
Idea, well, it's really easy. You can just go to Genesis 5, add up all these years, the beginning years where Seth had Enosh, had Canaan, and Mahalo. You add up all these years, and that's where we get the flood happened about 1,656 years into creation, and that's where we can add up all these years and get to a young earth. So we do say as a creation ministry that there are some advocates for the Septuagint set of texts and the Masoretic set of texts. You can say that you can still have a creationist viewpoint and say Earth is less than 10,000 years old. We prefer to say less than 8,000 years, because the Septuagint would land at about a 7,800-year-old Earth. The Masoretic text, as plainly written, would come up with about a 6,000-year-old Earth. And look, here's one clear scholar, Dr. Nolan.
There you go. I just love that part because he's like the textual context and interpretation is crystal clear, and also there's all these different interpretations, and it's fine as long as it's 10,000 years.
Okay, so it might as well be 4.5 billion. Might as well.
And then we get to right at this part, he gets to why does this matter theologically, and it's the same thing. It's like the very typical like Ken Ham AIG. If you don't believe Genesis chapters 1 through 11, then there's no reason for redemption, Jesus, the New Testament, all that stuff, right? Which is a very self-defeating strategy, I think, for reasons we've talked about. And then he does a wrap up where it's all about sin entering the world and there's no death. And if you have an evolutionary interpretation, the Bible doesn't work because you have millions of years of death before Adam and Eve, and does that whole spiel that if you're familiar with this, all of those beats by heart and we don't have to listen to it. So I'm going to just get right to the very end here. And he has this weird thing about Komodo dragons eating animals. It's weird.
That was so weird. He goes on this bizarre, that I was listening and I stopped and I was like, what the hell?
The Komodo dragon part was weird. You could all watch it if you want. The full conference, by the way, is linked in the description. If any of you have 4 hours to kill, help yourselves. It's in the description. The Komodo dragon thing was weird. So go ahead.
This whole chat basically of Dan Biddle is just Dan Biddle goes a bit Meshuggah. That's what it is.
And remember, and TD, you weren't here for the beginning, but the title of his talk is Top 10 Pieces of Evidence for Creation, and then just did not talk about that.
Okay, so he just goes Meshuggah. Got it.
It just didn't even try.
That's why Romans 8 says that everything in creation groans under the weight of sin. We went from vegetarianism. We used to have no death, no disease. People and animal lived in harmony. And now things are flipped. We now live under the curse.
So can we just appreciate there's one little bit there I want to point out because of our long culture war discussion earlier, our digression. We're not going to do it again. I just want to point out number 4 on this list. Number 5 on this, male-female harmony, male-female disharmony. Everyone catch that?
Right.
We're talking right. 2 sexes and gender roles and everything. Yeah, it's in there. That's always underlying all of this. It's all there.
You didn't play one of the things earlier where he makes the sexist comment about how God finishes his creation with a beautiful woman. This is a part that you didn't play earlier.
How do you know that?
Yeah, I skipped. Yeah,
how
that
do
was
you know that?
When I first listened to this and he said that, I lost my shit. I was like, "Are you serious?"
Yeah. Specifically, he gave Adam a beautiful woman as a companion.
Yeah.
Well, she's got to be
There's-
hot. She's probably hot, and she's probably white. That's
She's
the
wha-
Dan Biddle
had to be
way.
Yeah,
white.
that is a good
That-
point.
like Mormon Jesus.
Look, let's be clear. In all of the young Earth media that collectively this panel has consumed, have you ever seen a depiction of Adam and Eve where they weren't a white couple?
No.
I thought you were gonna say, have you ever seen a woman or a person of color speak?
Fair enough.
Also,
Fair
no.
Oh man.
Fair point. Yeah. Nope. It's also, I mean, let's just say it. Also, the typical depiction of Jesus, a dude from the Middle East 2,000 years ago, is like a white surfer dude from the 1960s.
Yeah, the very best you can get for Yeshua is Greek. Is maybe a bit Greek, and that is the absolute best.
It's,
and that isn't white. That's going to be Mediterranean. So he's still going to not be what they consider white. So it's like,
All right. So I don't even think we need to play the end of this. It's just he's just quoting scripture. It's all scripture. There's nothing here, right? The wolf. Who cares?
I think it's worth noting, though, that this is another classic piece of creationist lore. And I've noticed that let me make sure I'm using this term correctly. They've been trying to memory hole, I believe that's the term, some of their old weirder ideas that they still hold. They still hold them, but they're not talking about them as much because it's like people are like, what the hell are you talking about? And like this idea of everything being vegetarian before the fall is one of those things. Because it's just really hard to get away with in this day and age, doing the Dwayne Gish thing where you have the T-Rex and it's like macerating melons with its gigantic teeth.
I just like it's one of those things. So God intentionally redesigned all of us to eat meat, which he didn't have to do. He chose to. I mean,
that's at the arc part.
Yeah,
that's
when I had Joseph Wilson on. Recently,
Jackson,
he was an archaeologist. He mentioned the the Velikovskian roots of young Earth creationism, and one of the things
for everyone, not Jackson. Hang on, for anyone who doesn't know, not me, but for anyone who doesn't know, and I want to be clear, not me, but for anyone who doesn't know, what does that mean?
I'm sorry. Immanuel Velikovsky was a guy in the I believe he was a geologist back in the 1950s was when he kind of got his big break. He wrote Chariots of the Gods, which was a book about it was like the planets were like colliding.
That name because I have that book. Yeah,
they were like bouncing around in the solar system, and he was basically trying to like redefine how physics works, basically. But the reason he wrote this was to explain things in the Bible because he was like, if the Bible says that manna fell from heaven, that must have literally happened. Now, it wasn't God, obviously, but it was like, like carbohydrates from like, I don't know, Venus or something as it flew by, fell off and fell down to Earth and in the atmosphere got transformed into edible food somehow. But what's funny is that sounds ridiculous, of course, but there are still a lot of people today who take that sort of stuff seriously. They think that there were either planetary collisions or near misses or whatever, and these are recorded in human cultures because we have to take all human cultures and their mythologies very seriously for whatever reason. But what's funny is when Whitcomb and Morris wrote the Genesis flood, Whitcomb was a big Velikovskian. He was like, this is the mechanism by which we explain the global flood, the parting of the Red Sea, the falling of manna. And Morris was like, we're not doing this.
and that happened so many times with the writing of the Genesis flood as well, where they were quarreling about what to keep in because some of the members wanted to take things a little bit into woo zone and others did not. So still, even in the finished version, there was still some Velikovskian stuff that snuck in. They didn't excise all of it. And if you read Kent Hovind's idea about the freaking asteroid that hits Earth and then the forms the poles, the North and South Pole, that's literally word for word something Velikovsky would say. And I realized that because I was rereading my Stephen Jay Gould book, Ever Since Darwin.
And because I remember I was reading it for a different reason, but I was like, oh, he's got a chapter on Velikovsky in here. And I was reading that, I was like, oh, the stars are all aligning.
Yep.
Everything makes sense now. Anyway,
there are some
That's wild.
geologists who were in the Deluge Society, or it might have been the I think it was the DGS. I think it was the Deluge Geological Society, who were like, they were doing like pseudo hydroplate, like in the 1960s or 1940s, actually, I think it was, where they're talking like you can find these little. It's honestly like a little fun scavenger hunt, or you go through, you read these old books, and you're like, hey. I just heard, Michael Behe say something to the tune of that the other day, and for the more reasonable stuff. The less reasonable stuff usually
sorry,
on that
Worlds
show.
in Collision,
Okay,
not
folks.
Chariots of the Gods. I made that was my mistake. Worlds in Collision. Von Daniken was Chariots of the Gods. My mistake.
I have a minor social thing left for the Adam and Eve thing. Shit, I'm going to quote my anthropology professor.
Quick.
White. So socially, the concept of whiteness is whatever the person defining whiteness wants it to be. It is made up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like a created kind in that way. What the hell?
Zach,
It is the most.
Hey, Zach.
Race is made up, and white is the most vacuous of them all.
Hey, Zach, has anyone made a video on that specifically?
Somebody has, yeah, for sure.
It was me, the grasshopper's tail. I was the one who did it.
And also, folks, go over to Talk Pop Gen. He's got a great video on why races are fake. It's excellent.
Yeah.
And also, you can fight with trolls in the comments. They're still there. It's
hilarious.
No.
I've resisted the urge to turn off the comments because I have a couple of people who, for whatever reason, have like made it their like life's mission to fight with the people in the comments of that video, to the extent that I've like given them like moderator control so that they can like boot people when it gets too bad. But like, I don't know, they seem to be having fun with it, so I just let them go.
It's the racists in those comments are getting roasted to no end. It's great.
I mean, I would just go delete those comments because I can't. I just see that and go,
we got a super chat, folks. We're in overtime already, so we got a super chat from Mr. Cliff for £2. Moo. Thank you.
Moo.
I appreciate it. Right in my ear. Okay. So, folks, we don't need to hear the last 30 seconds of Dan Biddle here. So this is where we are going to call it. So we're going to take Biddle down, and we're going to go in the opposite order that we went before. So, TD Lane, if you're doing things on YouTube, tell us about them. And if you're not, that's okay.
No, man,
that's okay.
The first thing I've done on YouTube in actual years.
Well, it was a pleasure to. It was a pleasure for you to join us, Erica. What do you have coming up?
Too much stuff. I got a lot of projects that have been boiling in my brain and also in my Microsoft Word documents for quite some time, in various stages of completion. I have one video that was set to release on Tuesday or whatever in 2 days. That is like me being kind of mean to Rob Carter and Jeff Tompkins and kind of rubbing in the fact that nobody believes Jeffrey Tompkins anymore, which is really funny. It's just really funny. They
won't even say the number anymore.
They won't even say the number, and they won't even drop his name anymore. And so I'm rubbing some salt in the wound on that. I think I called it something like "I killed this creationist argument," and it's like it's very cheeky. But then, because I've got this debate coming up, I'm live streaming it on my channel. I'm debating Jerry Bergman, who is incidentally, and I hope Jerry doesn't see this because like, Jerry overlaps with Dwayne Gish. Like he's an OG. He's been doing this for a very long time.
Why are you doing this to yourself?
Yeah, so I'm going to have a debate with him on
what date is that?
Record. It's on the 17th. It's coming up.
17th. That's in 3 days, folks. And you're gonna live stream that on your channel. You're saying,
sure is.
So we don't have to deal with SFT. That's awesome.
Not only that, but I bartered with Donnie to make sure that super chats on my channel will get equal weigh-in for super chats on his. So if you feel like donating to me to ask to heckle Jerry Bergman,
there you go.
By all means.
Also, here's the thing, folks. Here's the thing for that debate, because Donnie's moderating. I'm assuming Donnie's moderating that debate.
Donnie's moderating.
So when he moderates during the Q&A, so folks, this is a little secret. Keep this between us here, us 5 and 100 of our friends who are watching right now. What you should do, the way the Q&As work for Donnie's debates, is the person who gets the question gets the last word. So what you might be tempted to do is dunk on Dr. Bergman with a gotcha question. But what you ought to do is send a question and say, question for Erica. Isn't it true that blah, 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 and then tee it up so then she gets the last word on each of those questions is what you ought to do. Don't tell anyone that. But that's what you should do.
I'm not trying to toot my own horn on this one, but I've consumed a copious amount of Jerry Bergman content over the past probably 2 or 3 weeks.
I'm so sorry.
It's going to be
okay.
It's going to be a bloodbath. I'm really sorry to say that, but I know this man inside and out. I almost bought his book Slaughter of the Dissidents, which is all about how people are being silenced for being creationists online.
Did he name this is a rabbit hole, but did he name any of them? A yes or no will do. Did he name like more than one person? Did he? Because when I debated him a few months ago, I asked him, he was like, oh, people are getting censored and tenured people are getting fired. I was like, who? Tell us. And he couldn't name anybody.
Okay, wait. I don't have time to get it. There's a line in my Ronald.
Don't do it.
There's a line in my Ronald Numbers extended edition where he's like, he covers Bergman, and Ronald Numbers has passed away, unfortunately. He's my idol. But he wrote this revised edition in 2006 or 2008. So after the Kitzler and Dover trial, it's very up to date, whatever. It's called The Creationist. It's a really wonderful book. And he's got this entire section on Bergman in there where he's like, Bergman's entire thing is that he talks about how people are being silenced at universities for being creationists. And then he has this scathing, he's like super objective, very, I think, very graceful guy. He gives people, he gives them benefit
more
of the
credit
doubt.
than they deserve.
More credit than they deserve. And in his scathing little paragraph, he's like, in basically every single one of these cases that I was able to track down, it's like grossly misconstrued, not at all how Bergman has presented it. And in fact, allegedly, the reason why he was terminated from his job at Bowling Green is because he was not honest about the credentials that he had, allegedly. I don't know if that's true, but that's what Ronald Numbers said. May he rest in peace.
Well, I try to be scrupulous about using appropriate titles for people. So in all my back and forth stuff with Bergman and the debate and the follow-up with the debate, I have been referring to him as Dr. Bergman. And just in the last 3 weeks or so, I've been preparing for my video on his third follow-up article following the debate. And it may be the case that the title may not be entirely appropriate in the same way that Kent's title is not entirely appropriate.
Oh dear.
Shock and awe.
Stinky.
We need to talk about this later, Dan, because I found some similar, I've gone down that rabbit trail myself. I don't think I've made it as far as you have, but similar
it may, we can talk before your debate.
For somebody who's so involved in the medical community, he sure doesn't know his gross morphology very well. Let's put it that way.
Jackson, what do you have cooking, sir?
Well, videos. I had my political arc recently where I did like full rapid fire videos on like the history of misinformation in over the last like 100 years or so, and it culminated in some rather political talking points I made. But that I won't be doing many of those in the near future. I won't be doing many of those. My next video is, the next scripted video, the next live video will be my talk with Matt Dillahunty tomorrow, which is my normal Thursday show. And then my next scripted video will be the Polypifer's Tale, which is a fancy word for coral, old word. And so this one goes out to Zach. I think he'll enjoy this video on, which is all probably stuff he already knows, but it's on anemones and corals, and the one before this one was the jellyfish's tail. And so if you like invertebrates, we're almost done with the animals. There are only two more videos and we're done with the animals, and there's like only, I think, like 8 videos left, and then we're done with this series that has taken
this series is incredible, folks. If you haven't been following this series, this is like
it really is
like career defining work. It's fantastic.
I appreciate that
because people should be following this.
I do appreciate that because we it's not just me, of course. It's RJ, Nestle, Rational Mind. We've all put in a lot of hard work over the last like almost 5 years that we've been doing this
Yeah.
series. And so, yeah, it's been really cool.
What a commitment, too.
I mean, I love the book. I love the Ancestor's Tale. It's got a lot of stuff that there are some things that are kind of cringe in it, even though I love it. There are some things that are like, need a little bit of updating. But I think overall, it's a great book. I highly recommend people read it. And if you don't want to read it, if you just want to watch my videos instead, that's fine. You can do that.
And Jackson, since we're here, have you ever written a book at all that you can recommend to people that maybe this one right here, maybe that one,
this one right here.
Right here.
Oh man, the rocks
were there. This book is a tome, and RJ and I are working on The Rocks Were There Volume 2. I just sent RJ the second one will be 7 chapters, just like the first one. And I just sent RJ my rough draft, because usually I like draft it, send it to RJ, he edits it, sends it back to me, I look it over, and then we do it. And so I just did chapter 5, I believe 6. I believe RJ's drafted 6 already. So really, and then he's drafting 4 right now. Also, things are a bit out of whack because we kind of changed the way we were doing things, but as we were working on it. But really, 7 is the only one that I have to draft left, and then I'll just have to edit his chapters, and then boom, we're done. This last one was on. It was really a lot of stuff about like, why don't we find humans and dinosaurs together? Did birds evolve from dinosaurs? We talked about I have endothermy on the brain, literally and metaphorically, because there was a big section because Ken Ham wrote this chapter that was so very long, and he talked about it took like 4 pages in like size 11 Calibri font, actually one of the pages in size 10 font, to go, because it's just a footnote or a side note basically, on just how he says in one sentence, he says, oh, they used to say dinosaurs were cold-blooded, now they say dinosaurs are warm-blooded because birds are warm-blooded. And I was like, there's so much that has to be explained, so wrong. Because you have to talk about the history
book is
of
good.
Dinosaur
Everybody should read the book.
Yeah.
The book is, I can say firsthand, the book is excellent. Everyone should get the book and read the book.
Jackson, is it true that after you finish Rocks 2, no more creationism, you're done?
So my hope
he's going to go full bread. No, he's going full bread tuber after that. That's it.
You should actually see, no joke, you should see my list of topics. However, once I finish the Ancestor's Tale also, I will feel comfortable with my zoology series. Once we finish Rocks Volume 2, I will feel comfortable saying that I co-authored both of the world's most comprehensive books on young Earth creationism. I think I can take a rest from that, at least for now. Next is actually, I'm going to be asking Jonathan Baker for help, because I have a book that is on climate change denial, and I want to go through that chapter by chapter by chapter.
Right.
And then once we do that, then I've been reading a lot of history stuff recently, and I want to start making videos on that. So anyway,
I
don't know how you have time, sir. Right,
play the joke Dan made. Jackson's going to be coming in next Antache Films.
There you go. By the way, that reminded me, I did skip early in our video on Dan Biddle, like a minute and a half of him just plugging the Ark movie and the follow-up Tower Babel movie. We skipped it.
Disgusting.
Zach, what have you been up to, sir?
Oh, I've been up to a lot. I'm planning on moving soon. I'm getting a new job, so I'm transitioning between postdoc and professorship. So that's been kind of exciting.
Nice. That is
exciting. I do have 2 big projects that I'm working on. One is going to be a video essay on what I think is the most important debate in evolutionary biology ever, and most people don't know much about it. It's the big R.A. Fisher versus Sewell Wright debate. It really shaped the way we view the field today, and I think that it's it's often like not portrayed very well, and there's like a lot more nuance and intricacies in it that I really want to dig into and like really highlight the personalities and how it like really created the way that we view evolution today. So there's this sort of a Sewell Wright, R.A. Fisher debate video essay that I'm working on, and then because I've been involved in somehow I've gotten myself into like being the person that argues over Dennis Noble. I don't know how this happened to me.
Well, you made an hour-long video
Turin,
on him.
Shroud of Turin effect. That's what happened with Gordon.
The third way person, or the person that fights the third way somehow.
This is I think we've actually, I don't know if we've coined the term before right now, but I think Erica just coined the term. This is the Shroud of Turin effect, where it's if you know the expression, if there's a book you want to read, but the book doesn't exist, you must write the book. It's kind of similar to that, in that if there is something that needs debunking, no one has done it, so you did it. You're now that person.
You're the guy for that.
So our friend Jordan is the Shroud of Turin guy, and you're the Dennis Noble guy. And
him and his ilk were just like all over YouTube, garnering like hundreds of thousands of views and stuff. And so it just felt like somebody's got to say something, and just nobody was saying anything. So here I am.
So you did it.
Point being, because of that, sort of a side effect of that is that a lot of Dennis Noble's stuff is specifically about Richard Dawkins and the idea of a selfish gene. And so everybody wants to know, well, what do you think about Dawkins and the self? So I'm going to do a video essay reviewing the selfish gene, and I'm going to do it as a kind of like the legacy of Richard Dawkins, because not only did he just also publish what I think is probably going to be his last book, right?
Yeah.
So what I want to do is like go through the selfish gene and then compare it to like the Genetic Book of the Dead. And like, these are like sort of the bookends to his career. And then think about, what does this guy mean for us as evolutionary biologists, but also like in like the debate realm of evolution versus creation. Like, he has like been a central figure in like the new atheism movement.
He's got his eras, right? He's got the selfish gene era. He's got the new atheist era. He's got the transphobe on Twitter era. Like, he's got his career eras.
And so I think that like it's high time to like sort of, now that he's even admitted that he's at the end of his career, to like what has been his legacy. So I'm working on a video essay that's going to be sort of focused on the selfish gene, but really centered on what's the legacy of Richard Dawkins.
That's going to be really interesting. I'm really looking forward to that. Thank you. So what I've got coming up, folks, is I've got it, first of all, and I'm sure there will be some repeat appearances of our panel here tonight, because I am going to cover at least 2 more parts of this Genesis Apologetics conference, because Dr. Randy Galuza has 2 sections in it.
He's 2?
He's got 2. He's got 1. So the first is on continuous environmental tracking. And the second is on, I think it's just called Refuting Evolution or something like that. So yeah, he's got 2. And then Roop has 1. Biddle has another one. Erica, I watched the Roop one, and that's just got your name written all over it. So I'm sure you're going to cover that one.
You can't have me on for that, because we'll be here for 6 hours. Because I can't shut the hell up about that topic.
What we should do is, what I hope is that, because there's other ones that I won't cover that are not my thing. But what I kind of hope is we could do like the dismantle thing, where we all cover different bits of it, and just kind of scattershot it that way. And so I'm going to cover parts of this conference. I've had it for months. I've had this hyperspeciation video in the works that that's like, at some point I'll publish that I just keep changing it and adding to it.
Did you see Joel's paper on that in the journal, the like teaching evolution journal?
How recently?
A few years ago.
Oh, yeah. Yes. Then yes. Okay. If it's from a few years ago, then yes. This is a rabbit hole that I thought this was, and I've done this a bunch of times, where I thought, oh, this will be a quick 10 or 15 minute video. This is not going to be a quick 10 or 15 minute video. This is going to be
that's never once been the case. Not one time has that been the case.
Quick mission, in and out, 20 minutes.
Yeah, no, never. I thought this was going to be like, this is dumb. Look, you need all these elephants in like a century, and then it's way more than that. So there's like Egypt stuff in there. So I had to like read about like Egypt to like make sense of this stuff.
Oh, throwback to the potholer video on the like Egypt repopulation.
Yeah, right. It's
Jesus.
like you get it. Yeah, because it's like 80 years to like Middle Kingdom Egypt after an ice age.
Yeah.
It's yeah. So we're gonna
Rewatch me and Walker's bite-sized bust on Proboscideans because
yeah.
actually Walker did the math for that.
That's the
for
rate of like a new species every generation or whatever. Yeah, exactly. Right. So I've got that coming. I've got another installment in the Bergman saga because there's still one article from Fallout from our debate that I haven't covered yet. The Scales to Feathers one. I'm also currently apparently I'm having another fight with Discovery Institute right now. I've gotten no joke, in 2 weeks I've gotten 4 videos and 5 articles in response to my video from 2 weeks ago.
That's insane.
I've gotten like they have nothing better to do, and it's 3 people. It's Cornelius Hunter, David Klinghoffer, and I even got an article from Behe himself.
Nice.
So I've gotten
Yeah,
so they just have way too much free time, so that's ongoing as well. I'll have more on that at some
You know
point
what? You deserve it. Yeah, both of you deserve it. I feel like we've all had to read copious amounts of like Discovery Institute literature. I had to read those like 8 blog posts by Beckley when I wrote the Professor Dave
remember.
ones.
Yep.
Zach, you know what? It's your turn. You better kick the
pick a
hornet's
fight with
nest.
Discovery
It's your
Institute, buddy.
fault. You do it.
They're all fighty. Every single one of them.
They're-
Like if you piss one of them off, then you get into an exchange.
Because
Yeah,
that's probably how they make. I mean, that's how they make their money. You know, is putting
Yeah.
out those articles and
they're
stirring
not
up the
doing
base.
real science with the 7 figures of funding that they have.
Yeah.
Can I just? I want to say this really fast before you sign us off, Dan, because this is relevant to what you were just talking about, or well, to what all of us have been talking about. I saw this really interesting tweet. I think it was it was on Blue Sky, so it was a Blue Sky tweet. But
Was it
I think they're just all called tweets. To me, they're all called tweets because they're tweets. That's what they are.
Yeah,
But
whatever.
he tweeted something out the other day that was to the tune of like, it took a really long time for people to realize that like the main form of like media consumption, like where people get a lot of their information, and even from like the halls of science, a lot of ways people were getting their information, like how it did like this big swap over in the culture, at least from like radio to like movies, like in the when movies were getting really big. And he made this argument. He was like, I think we need to start realizing something similar is starting to happen, at least with like people used to be, you had to like read a book on a subject, go out and buy a book on a subject and read it to get esoteric niche knowledge of some specific thing. But now because YouTube is here and because social media is here in general, you can get at your fingertips super niche information on just about anything without needing to write a book on it. And I think that we've all contributed a lot to the body of knowledge that is like what is effectively video pamphlets or video too long books for some of us.
Essays, yeah.
Yeah, like on topics that I think are really important that decentralized media has allowed us to do, and I think that's really good.
Yeah, you in the modern age, something you've never been able to do before is possible. You can open up your social media. You can go and find a scientist like Jackson Wheat. You can find Jackson Wheat and ask him for niche information like how whale sex works.
And he'll tell you.
And he'll tell you.
He'll tell you in
He
detail.
will tell you. I want to when you sign us off, Dan. I'm going to find it and then I'll tell you guys afterwards once I find it.
All right, folks, thank you all for being here. I hope you found this fun. This is the second talk in this conference. It's the first one that we've covered. We will cover more. The science friends will have more to say about this conference. So stay tuned, watch this space. Thanks, everybody. Have a great night. Stay healthy. As always, don't get fooled. See you next time.
See ya.